As the sun came up over the Duke's massive crib, the maids were dishing on the down low about the insane pile of applications for the master of the house's new wife. One of them asked who'd even want to marry that piece of work, and the other shot back that nobody really cared. You just had to get a look at his face. The blonde one asked if it was true he totally threw a fit at the party last night, and the blue-haired maid told her to zip it. Word on the street is the Duke made some wasted baron get on his knees for questioning his family line and even had a servant dump nasty water all over him. The girl whispered that he must have a seriously messed up personality, but her friend just shushed her, telling her to shut it. They clammed up when some young aide, basically his lordship's right-hand man, cruised by juggling the crazy amount of paperwork. The dude had a seriously bad rep, so nobody wanted him to catch wind of their trash talk as the aide pushed open the heavy doors, trying not to drop all the files the Duke was waiting on. The aide was like, "Sorry to barge in." Leaning his hip against the table, the blonde dude asked if that was the whole haul. And the assistant said, "Yeah, that's the final cut, since a ton of people were trying to pawn off their daughters." The young guy let out a huge sigh and just slammed the massive stacks of papers with the noble girls' profiles onto the table with the pink-haired lady's file right on top. While sorting through a few, the aide asked if his lordship really had to go about it this way. He passed the files to the Duke, saying it was pretty weird to find a wife through interviews and that the other nobles would totally be talking smack about it later. The young dude's blue eyes lit up with a vibe, and he asked if the guy was for real about sending out invites. Glancing at the pic of the cute girl, the man replied that it was 100% the plan and that they needed to get on it like now. Barely even skimming the bios of these noble ladies, the Duke added that even that whack-job emperor should be happy with this. A bit later, a carriage was bumping along a road through a leafy forest, its big wheels clattering like crazy over the rocks and gravel. The pink-haired girl was totally confused about why she was stuck in a carriage heading to some engagement thing, because her entire body was already asleep from the long ride. She clutched the poofy skirt of her dress with her delicate fingers and mumbled about how some scummy jerk was about to be her fiancé. Ignoring her maid, she remembered how before all this crap she was all set to start her new career after being jobless for years, but that plan got totally wrecked by the disaster. When the girl opened her eyes, she was staring at Aurora, a character from a book who was a dead ringer for her, but with hot pink hair. Looked like her so-called parents were tripping about her and were stoked she woke up, which meant they weren't complete monsters at least. Then her mother hit her with the hard sell to marry the Duke, swearing that even though people called him a scumbag, she was positive it was all just a bunch of fake news. Jeffrey E.O. was the main dude in the last novel the girl read in her old life, and was known for being a total dirtbag. Shutting her eyes with a sigh, the lady thought she hadn't even had a minute to adjust to this body swap situation, and she was already getting prepped to get hitched. She snapped out of her thoughts and looked up only when the blue-haired maid called her name. The maid just straight up announced that her mistress's sighing was throwing her off and told her to knock it off, which totally caught her off guard and ticked her off. Right, her name was Angela, and she was the mistress's personal maid who did sewing and knitting, but she was still a real piece of work. Some gossip was floating around the estate that the girl was a straight-up terrible maid and was also known for her seriously bad and gloomy attitude. Long story short, all the other maids agreed that something was off with Angela, and now she was just staring out the carriage window looking shocked. She told her miss that they were there, and she jumped up to see for herself, asking if they were for real. Grabbing the window frame, Aurora held onto her hat and gawked at the insane views of the duchy spreading out before them. The girl said, "This garden is sick," and added that it felt like she was on that Euro trip she'd always dreamed of. A little later, the carriage pulled up and a guy greeted the miss, announcing that the Baron's daughter, Aurora Audrey, had finally made it to the palace. Next thing she knew, he was leading them down a covered hallway with the lady following him and the maid trailing behind with the luggage. Angela mentioned she figured it'd be freezing up north, but it turned out it wasn't half bad, and Aurora was stoked. She didn't have to get used to the weather. She also pointed out that the area was more central geographically speaking, since the war had split the country right down the middle as she kept walking. The pink-haired girl was thinking how the Duke couldn't even be bothered to greet his bride-to-be, which was a super bad sign for what was coming. The girl looked at her feet and followed her guide, thinking that this jerk had been dissing her family from the jump. Aurora snapped her head up, her eyes wide, as some lady bolted past her screaming and crying her eyes out, bumping her shoulder on the way. She was followed by a servant who tried to call her back, but the stranger just yelled that she didn't come there by choice and told her to bounce. To hell. The brunette was bawling her eyes out and just bolted, clutching her dress while her maid was trying to get her to chill. Our girl was nervously watching the whole messy scene go down and then looked back to see what was up. The guard couldn't have cared less that some sobbing girl just ran by them, so Aurora called out to him. The dude stopped and turned around looking all confused, and she stopped too, asking who that chick was. The big-shouldered guy seemed totally clueless why the new arrivals were so hung up on what just happened, since it was a regular thing around there. The girl scowled when he told her that stranger was one of the Duke's potential brides, just like Miss Audrey. Like she totally forgot why she was there. Aurora pointed at herself and was like, "Wait, I'm a candidate too." The guard looked surprised and said, Yeah, since she came to the palace for an interview," and she shot back that this was the first she'd heard of it, as he unrolled a scroll with all the ladies' names. The guy explained that Miss Audrey was candidate number 12. He showed the Baron's daughter and her personal maid to the waiting room, which was a pretty chill spot with high ceilings and light wood furniture. Face-palming Aurora muttered that only a psycho would run an interview like this, and that nobody told her she wasn't actually the Duke's fiancée yet. Angela, who was way too into the snacks on the table, asked if she was really that shocked seeing how nervous she was. The maid said she should have at least prepped for this, and Audrey was like, "For what exactly?" Stabbing another cake with her fork, the blue-haired girl explained that she was going to an interview and got a seriously in response. Aurora gave her a confused look and shot back, asking if she actually wanted her to go through with this whole thing. The maid replied it was a golden opportunity to level up while eyeing the food, and the miss straight up called her future husband trash, no hesitation. Angela pointed her fork at her mistress, asking if they weren't two peas in a pod. Raising an eyebrow, Audrey asked if her maid realized how out of line she was, and she just said she meant it in a good way. Giving her maid a totally unamused look, the pink-haired girl said she had a big mouth. Aurora huffed and said she had to at least give it a shot for her mom's sake, and her friend pointed out that her mom would freak if she came back so soon. Remembering how they'd skipped meals just to buy this dress for the visit, the girl let out a huge sigh. She'd had a ton of interviews in her past life, but never one to try out to be a bride, and that was just plain weird. Tapping her cheek, she figured she didn't remember this story having good reviews, which meant it should all be good. Some young guy walked in and called for Miss Aurora, and Angela shot up from her seat, dropping her fork like she hadn't just been chowing down. The green-haired dude did a little bow, put a hand to his chest, thanked her for waiting, and introduced himself as the Duke's right-hand man, Wendell Hamilton. Audrey stood up, clutching her pink hat, as he said he'd take her to his lordship's office and told her to follow him. After a short walk down the hall, the guy stopped at these massive doors, opened one, and told her to go on in. Bracing herself, Aurora squeezed her hat with her fingers, took a deep breath, and walked in the heels of her fancy shoes clicking. The blonde Duke was standing by the window, and didn't even bother to turn around until Wendell announced that the Baron's daughter, Audrey, was here. The man asked in a low voice if she was Miss Aurora, and the girl put a hand to her heart, saying it was a real pleasure to meet him. Turning around, the big-shot hero looked her over, hands clasped behind his back, and said he was Jeffrey Eteka. Staring at him and blushing a little from meeting this character for the first time, she listened to him say he was happy to have her at his place. Hiding her face with her hand so he couldn't see her, freaking out, the pink-haired girl thought that maybe this whole engagement thing wasn't so bad after all. Getting comfy in his chair, the Duke told her to take a seat across from him, and Aurora did as she was told, sitting at the long table. Jeffrey waited for her to get settled, and then said he'd read her letter, and Audrey blurted out, "You read what?" The blonde dude clarified that he was talking about a message her parents had sent over recently, and she jumped in saying she totally remembered. In reality, the girl had no clue what was in that letter, but she played it off like she knew and said she was so glad the Duke got it. Eteka slowly sipped his tea, sizing her up the whole time, and definitely wasn't giving off friendly vibes. Aurora was totally roasting the guy in her head when he said he was going to be real with her, and then added that he'd considered just ghosting her right after reading it. The Duke then added that he changed his mind when he heard her talking smack about him in the hallway, and she froze solid, asking if he'd heard everything. The blonde dude just calmly, he broke it down that since he had haters abroad, the whole castle was bugged, and he was kind of thrown that she hadn't been dealt with for talking smack. Audrey got all jittery, asking what made him flip the script on his decision. She was bugging, thinking on top of everything the Duke might be some kind of freak who gets off on putting people down. And she cleared her throat like she was reading all the questions the Baroness was asking in her head. Jeffrey just nodded a bunch like, yeah, it's all true. The dude decided to explain his kind of wild logic, saying he was looking for a wife with some real backbone. The pink-haired girl just raised an eyebrow, giving his face a hard look, and thinking he wasn't a creep, just a total idiot. His hype man was bugging out behind him, saying she might take that the wrong way, but the Duke was like, nah, it's true. Wendell jumped in, explaining his lordship wasn't after some older bride, just one who was brave and sharp, and the girl shot back, since when does a relationship mean that? Cutting them off a second later, Jeffrey said, "Aight, that's enough," and then asked Lady Aurora if he could hit her with a request. Eteka stared down the girl in front of him, and once he saw she was locked in, he asked if she could just pop him one right now. Aurora was like, say what now, and figured the dude was definitely a freak. She put her cup down, saying she so did not sign up for this. She bounced from her seat and was like, I'd better dip, getting a few steps toward the exit, but the Duke's assistant asked if he could break it all down. When the pink-haired girl asked how you could even explain a request like that, the young guy said the boss just wanted to see if she had it in her. Audrey still wasn't getting it, and asked why on earth you'd ask your potential future wife that when she heard someone else breathing right in her ear. Aurora spun away from the guy and hesitantly asked him what the deal was. Jeffrey stroked his chin and said real thoughtful that she never looked away when they talked and wasn't even scared of him. The dude said sorry if his words threw her off, and that if she was cool with it, he wanted a chance to clear things up. Realizing she was kinda stuck, the girl clutched her hat again and nodded, saying she was all ears. That's when the Duke set his standards. For a partner, were pretty out there. The pink-haired girl asked if he needed someone who didn't flinch when people stared. She nervously asked him to spell it out after hearing from Jeffrey that his future wife couldn't back down from his gaze. Eteka said that for a long time the streets have been talking about his vibe. He can come off cold and the nobles see him as a ticking time bomb even. The emperor was trying to put him on a leash, and everyone was on his case pushing him to lock it down ASAP. But I move a little different, the Duke added all calm and cool, saying he wasn't about to take any more heat and had cooked up a plan. The man brought up the contract and then laid it out that there'd be no real marriage and that his chin with her fingers. Eteka nodded yes, saying that from what he could see, the Baroness caught on real quick. The blonde dude explained that she'd have to play the role of his ride-or-die bride, and he'd act like some total scumbag who'd been changed by love. The girl covered her mouth, trying to choke back the cringe and the fear, realizing he knew exactly what people called him. The Duke just busted out laughing at her reaction and told his future wifey not to act, shocked that he was in on the joke. The pink-haired girl asked why the dude told her to deck him, and he explained he wanted to check her reaction and see if she had guts. Thinking about the last candidate up for the wife gig, Jeffrey said most people can't even look him in the eye. Sometimes he couldn't even get a word out, because some would just run off crying from one question, and it was a total waste of time. Aurora also remembered that stranger's freaked-out look and thought, yeah, that tracks, when the fair-haired dude added that they just weren't cut out for the role. The Duke looked the girl up and down, and noted that for real, she wasn't showing any of that vibe with him at all. Hitting him back with the same locked-in careful stare, the Baroness thoughtfully mumbled that he was just testing her. Audrey furrowed her brows, thinking the whole setup wasn't so bad, but she needed to know what the payday was for all this. She asked what the compensation was for these 2 years, and Wendell, who was just waiting for this moment, practically jumped for joy behind the Duke as he paced. The young dude shook some papers in front of him and asked if he could let Miss Aurora in on the reward. The Duke's assistant handed her the docs papers just covered from top to bottom, and then told her to scope out what they'd already put together. Flipping through page after page and barely holding them all, the girl quietly whispered about inheriting some mines and the... When it came to signing over the property, his hype man was quick to say the mines were pumping out diamonds. The estate was a straight-up mansion, and the real estate was making bank. The Baroness was basically bugging. She couldn't believe her luck as she listened to the dude explain how, according to the deal, all this was about to be hers. Looking up, the girl was totally vibing, all ready to go, asking where she needed to sign. That if she had even the slightest hope of them catching feelings, she needed to dead that thought right now. Acting like he was God's gift, the dude added that she had zero chance with him, asking if she was clear on that. Smirking at how full of himself the Duke was, the Baroness clapped back. So what happens if you're the one who falls for me? Watching his face get all tight, she figured he was the one who came in with all the attitude first. Jeffrey looked at his future bride with a grin, leaned his hips against the table, and then said in a bored-ass tone that it was never going to happen. Squinting with a sly look, Aurora asked if they could raise the stakes on this contract to make it more interesting. He suddenly snatched her by her skinny wrist and pulled her in close, asking what she thought he'd do if he actually did fall for her. Then he should get something out of it too, and she just stood there thinking. The Duke rubbed his chin and asked if taking away all the cash and prizes promised in the deal would be interesting enough. Slapping her palm hard on the contract, Audrey was like, bet, not about to back down an inch. The pink-haired girl stood between his legs, raised the fountain pen, tickled his nose with it, and told him she'd never fall for him anyway. Signing the contract and hashing out all the details took way longer than the girl expected, and afterwards she called Angela so tired she could barely stand up. The Baroness announced she was back, but she looked like she'd been through it. The maid who'd been snacking the whole time stood up and said she thought it would be faster, but her boss had been gone for more than an hour. When Aurora crashed on the sofa, the maid said her soul was literally leaving her body. The girl told her not to trip, saying it'd be back soon. The maid said knowingly that she'd heard it's always the quiet ones who start the most drama, and the Baroness just clicked her tongue. Touching her boss's shoulder, the maid sighed and asked if she was really one of those people who loves to make huge mistakes. Aurora just waved it off and said the dude wasn't really her type, so she definitely wasn't going to fumble this bag. Angela asked if she was really that sure even after seeing his face, and the Baroness actually blushed a little. Getting up from his chair, the Duke put his half-empty glass on the table and declared that it didn't matter. It was just time to put an end to all this. Jeffrey walked on and ordered his right-hand man to find someone to leak the news to the Imperial Palace and let everyone know. Casually stretching his stiff shoulders as he walked, the man sighed and said that now they'd definitely stop bugging him about getting married. The pink-haired girl was just sprawled out on a massive comfy bed that was smack in the middle of a super decked-out room, just thinking about everything that was now her life. With her so-called fiancé's crew and all this bougie luxury, she knew she'd totally hit the jackpot. Compared to this sick pad, the room she was stuck in before was a straight-up dump. Shot up in bed, realizing Jeffrey had been basically ghosting her since she got here, peeping the two maids who were obviously dying to know the deal with the new girl at the castle but were keeping quiet, the girl called out to him. Aurora waited till they looked over and was like, if you got questions, just spit 'em out. When the girls kind of stumbled over their words trying to clarify what kind of questions to ask, the pink-haired chick promised it was all good and that she got bored a lot anyway. The maids gave each other a tense look, cause the upper crust almost never let. Audrey totally froze when she heard them ask if it was true that his lordship fell for his new bride at first sight. Spilling the gossip the maid said he had set up that whole selection thing just to meet her, and after that boom they were promising each other forever love. Another girl chimed in that she heard he was super touchy-feely and her friend thought he'd scared the crap out of her being so sudden, and quietly asked why they hadn't chatted in the garden. Already looking all put together, the blonde dude just nodded. Hearing her call him your lordship, the blonde guy said that before she said anything else, they needed to switch up how they addressed each other. Eteka explained that his bride shouldn't be so formal with him, and Audrey agreed, asking what she should call him then. Turning around, the Duke checked her out for a sec and then said it would be way, and muttered that she knew it, like the maids hadn't just pulled that stuff out of thin air, but that it was all his doing, and the man just nodded in agreement. Audrey said he should have given her a heads up, decided to lean into his rep, saying that wasn't true at all, and that she had it twisted. The pink-haired girl's jaw dropped, totally insulted when she heard. She was totally conflicted about his whole vibe. She had to fight the urge to go off on him and just yank her hand back right then and there. The girl just asked if, especially in the bedroom. Reading on, the pink-haired girl got pissed, saying this was all a bunch of crap, and told him to just forget he ever read that mess. Jeffrey hopped up on the pink-haired girl, looked down, and explained that if it's reasonable, she'd consider it, but if not, she's out putting the mug he was chugging tea from on the table. Was down to agree, but only if she could prove she was worth a damn. A couple days after that chat, the Eteka family's carriage pulled up to this huge building that looked like it was in the middle of nowhere. Rocking a new dress, Aurora called her maid over, after hopping out of the carriage, and quietly but for real, announced that they'd finally made it. Jeffrey gave her the job of turning a money-losing restaurant called Human Taste profitable, and the place looked kinda sketch from the outside. Luna, who was part of the guild, said it was the newest spot in town. Joint. Looking around, Aurora thought the decor was kinda basic, but the customers didn't seem to care, at least until the waiter started whispering. Luna immediately flashed the Ika Guild's crest at the dudes, explaining that the lady next to her was the Duke's fiancée. Every worker who heard that started scrambling and tripping over themselves, and one waiter told another to get the hostess like now. The hostess and HR manager Oscar, a mature-looking woman with glasses, apologized for being a little late to meet them. Wooden table by the windows, Aurora heard that this place had over 2,000 dishes to choose from. The woman told her to check out the menu, and the girl's jaw dropped when this massive thick book got dropped on the table in front of her. Totally overwhelmed, thinking they had over 1,000 combos, the pink-haired girl said she'd just take the first. Cool thing about this spot was all the options, and Aurora muttered that they were going for quantity over quality. They couldn't keep talking because the front door wouldn't even take them. A little while later, they said dinner was served, and the table started getting loaded up with apps and hot dishes from all over. After cutting off a piece, while the waiter was watching all excited, the Duke's girl thought it looked pretty good, and smelled kinda wild too. All three of them went quiet to see what this food was hitting for, and their silverware started clanking. The pink-haired girl covered her face, gagging and trying not to spit it all over the place, and Angela didn't even bother hiding how nasty it was. And when that seemed kinda messed up, Luna Hast shot back that actually they were the spot's biggest regulars. Meanwhile, these huge dudes rolled up to their tables and started pounding on them, yelling that they were starving and wanted their grub like now. Not giving the waiters and cooks a break, the orcs kept demanding more food and slamming the tables if they didn't get their check or a new plate instantly. Taking in this whole chaotic scene, the pink-haired girl couldn't figure out why the restaurant was in the red when it was so packed. The woman swallowed hard and nodded when Lady Aurora casually asked if she could see the books. Coming back a bit later, the manager handed. The Baroness thought, "Yeah, she's totally full of it." The manager was sharp. No way she'd mess up a job this easy. Aurora glanced over at the guild member, thinking that from the way Luna was all quiet and not even surprised, she was in on this lie too. Deciding she had to see it for herself, the pink-haired girl got up, and the huge room, the Baroness still couldn't figure out what was up thinking. Everything looked pretty clean, at least for now. She clocked the empty shelves and said she'd just gotten a little closer, her face darkening like a thundercloud, and said she'd seen enough. The manager suddenly snapped that even if the miss kept poking around, she wouldn't find a thing, and Audrey just stared at her, confused but quiet. The manager was clearly getting super antsy when the future Duchess asked if they had something to hide. They were finally going to tell her where the food disappeared to. All of a sudden, there was a clatter from behind her, and a waiter rushed to the back door quick with an apology, but it obviously wasn't him. Spinning around, Aurora asked if someone was out back, and the kid started waving his hands, insisting there was absolutely nobody out there. She just stepped forward and said, let out a heavy sigh and rubbed her face mentally, cursing out Jeffrey, who probably knew about this whole setup and sent her here just to mess with her. Looking from the poor hungry faces to jacking their food. Luna added that their hands were tied, but Aurora asked why they had to be so secretive and hide the fact they were helping out. The manager mumbled that the Emperor isn't big on charity. These folks had been straight up starving on the streets since she and her crew rolled up. Grabbing a plate, the girl headed out the door while the people started whispering that they growled that the smell was fire and they needed to eat whatever was cooking like right now. A waiter came out holding plates of those pancakes, smiling as he announced that this supposed to judge the grub, because even though they weren't picky, they could still tell good food from garbage. The monsters all yelled together that, and the other cooks, what was up. The whole vibe of the place just sparked, and everyone there had a feeling the joint's profits were about to go through the roof. After a while, notice she packed like nothing. The aide suggested he could make the call tomorrow. The blonde dude shook his head and said it needed to happen now. Jeffrey stopped his paperwork when he heard the assistant say he was on it, but that the lady couldn't make it for a fitting. The Duke took off the reading glasses he was using as he put his pen down and asked what the holdup was all of a sudden. The young guy had to remind him that Miss Audrey wasn't even in the palace since his lordship himself had sent her to deal with the weak profits at the guild restaurant. The Duke was like, that was a few days ago, thinking out loud that maybe the girl got hurt and couldn't get back. Ingredients they didn't know about and they should just grab all of it. She was schooling them like, if you tell a supplier you'll take the product they can't move, you can get the stuff at menu, then asked him to pick something else. While a waiter was checking her out, he managed to say with a smile that the new manager was seriously awesome when suddenly he saw a familiar stern and new manager who'd whipped up a new dish that was already blowing up. Jeffrey, who was obviously not feeling the dude's checking out his girl, cut the waiter off mid-sentence. They were short-staffed, and his lady had stepped up to help. Meanwhile, Aurora was trying to shake this clown, telling him she wasn't into orc dudes and needed him to back off, and muttered, "Speak of the devil and he shall appear." After that, she said at this rate they were going to be rolling in cash, and to keep the orcs from getting bored, they'd drop a new menu every single month. The Baroness said they got awesome feedback on the savory pancakes, and everybody was also digging the noodle soup and the go-to pork dish. Jeffrey said that saying that was totally it, but she probably just got lucky. Getting up and pushing his chair back, the blonde guy said that if she was done here, then they could bounce to the palace together. When she was like, "We're leaving together," he shot back, "Why not? We're engaged, we can do what we want." The girl was thinking, yo, don't start rumors, but out loud she just said she was heading home. Luna gave her a thumbs up and told her to have fun with his lordship while the waitresses gushed about how romantic it all was. With a nervous smile, the girl said she'd totally be back tomorrow, but Jeffrey just flat out said, "No, you're not." Reports, and she didn't need to come in. The women told her to just drop by whenever she wanted to hang out and promised everything was cool. Smiling, Aurora said that and that interview offers were still on the table. Jeffrey stroked his chin and then smirked, looking at his bride and asking why they didn't just give it a shot. Unable to stop herself from blushing hard, him on Jeffrey was like, "Yo, I gotta tell you something," and she was all ears asking what was up. The blonde dude said he was bouncing from the castle for a little while, and while he was gone, she needed to stay put on the property, no leaving. When he threw in that they'd talk about it when he got back, Aurora wasn't having it and asked if the girl got curious and asked if his business had anything to do with the whole racial beef that was popping off. After nodding his head yeah a few times, the blonde guy, Angela, chimed in that they'd been lined up since morning, straight up chanting for the pancakes, and the future Duchess just spun around thinking about how orcs are such fiends for sugar. The pink-haired chick wondered if she should whip up some more desserts with honeycomb or whatever. Her personal maid was just going to town on some cookies, and between munchings said she'd heard some gossip on her way over. Aurora slapped a fat stack of restaurant reports on the table and totally cringed when she heard the Duke had been back for a while already, bolting out of the 'cause nobody told her anything, and the Duke totally should have hit her up the second he got back. As she was tearing down the hall, Wendell popped up in front of her holding some papers. He gave her a smile and said he was just about to come see her, asking where she was headed. The Baroness straight up growled that she was on her way to see and asked if they were hiding something. Jeffrey yanked the door open and was right in the girl's face, snapping, all irritated that he'd asked not to be bothered. Eyes suddenly flashed bright red. He blinked, and they went right back to a dull gray. Aurora just stared at him, totally surprised when he asked what was up. The girl, it was none of her business. Pushing his glasses up, he told her she picked the absolute worst day to show up, but he'd still keep his word once again, not being able to hide that all the deets looked cool, and the guy pointed out that her reaction was kinda lame. Aurora looked up, blew a piece of hair out of her face, and asked what exactly he was expecting from her. Eteka said he heard most chicks dream of a baller engagement party, but he guessed she wasn't one of them. Looking at the guy, the Baroness said, with a smirk, that this is what you get when you marry for the bag and not for love, and the Duke kinda mulled that over. Audrey said she couldn't care less, but the flashier they made it, the better, pointing out at him the girl was like, this'll be a way better show, and the blonde dude was on board. Aurora asked if this party was basically her big debut with the high society crowd, and the Duke confirmed it, then helped her flip the page and pointed at something. The pink-haired girl's jaw dropped when she heard that since the gossip about them had gone viral, she needed to flesh out this part of the story. Kinda skeptically if people would actually buy it. She listened with a totally bummed-out face, not believing that this was plausible, and that some people would even add their own spin to the story, would hook her up with a bodyguard. Mustering all her patience, the pink-haired girl listened to him and agreed, not really thinking it was a big deal. Eteka ripped off his glasses. Lessons. And she replied that she wasn't sure she could hang with a schedule like that. She got up and looked at her personal maid. Tearing her eyes from the wax schedule, Aurora mumbled that she really didn't want to get in trouble, and the blue-eyed maid asked what she meant by in trouble. The pink-haired girl said that during her lessons, if she so much as clinked a cup, the etiquette teacher would pinch her. The maid was like, "Wait, that's not how they punished you, right?" And Audrey confirmed it was every single time she messed up. Smiling nervously, the girl asked if that's not how everyone here learned, and her maid just shook her head. Angela then suddenly asked if what the lady said about losing her memory was for real, and she said yeah. Looking at her, the future Duchess froze, low-key freaked out when she heard her ask if she was sure her family didn't have something to do with it. The dark-haired woman said it. About food. The girl muttered it was the first time she'd ever heard of getting punished during lessons, and crossed her arms mumbling that she should have been there. All of a sudden, there was a knock on the door, and then the Duke's right-hand man was like, "Pardon me, Madame Aurora," and the girls turned to look at him. She sighed and asked if Wendell needed something, and the girl was like, "My bad for just bustin' in," and dropped her full, but the stank face she was rocking was anything but friendly. A minute later, the pink-haired girl just flopped onto the bed and started wailing on it, screaming about how she was trapped, and Angela had to get her in line. Her whole day was booked solid. The dance lesson was a brutal 3 hours. Then at noon, a culture class kicked off. That was another 3 hours long. In the evening, during an equally long history lesson. But Aurora shot back that they were actually super chill and were impressed with how fast she was catching on. The history teacher and the dance instructor were both totally gassing her up about how well the Duke's future wife was doing. She was even kind of digging all the props, but when they asked her to kick it up a notch, she knew she'd totally played herself. The maid just shrugged and said that, just like back at their restaurant, the lady had a knack for being low-key amazing at random stuff. Thrown off by how she said it, Aurora had to ask if that was supposed to be a compliment, and it was an honor to be her student. The woman just blurted out, "Is that Di?" And the Baroness was like, "Wait, what?" The girl kind of mumbled, eyeing the new girl. Then Aurora got hit with a bunch of super personal questions she couldn't and didn't want to answer given her situation. For 2 days straight, the woman had been nonstop hating on every little thing about the student. Hopping up real quick, Aurora said sorry to the Countess and stuttered out that she had no idea she'd already walked in. Roseman, surprisingly, didn't go on a whole rant, just sighed that it was a waste of breath and told her to sit. The future Duchess had to swallow all her rage and just let out a sigh, thinking at least the woman hadn't launched into some long-winded speech. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a dead serious Angela showed up holding a tray with the teapot cups and some snacks. The Countess sat down and mumbled that today was all about etiquette, and the setup was going to be their first tea party, eyeing the maid as she put the cups on the table. Aurora knew she wouldn't be able to focus with her around, but she went along with it. Glancing at the maid who was done, but still just standing there, the Countess asked why she was still hanging around. Angela gave a polite nod and said the bossman asked her to stick around, just in case Lady Roseman wasn't feeling the snacks. Seeing her cool as a cucumber face, the pink-haired girl thought. The woman warned her with a smirk to watch her back, 'cause the hotter the flame, the faster and uglier it burns out. Angela stayed quiet, and the dark-haired woman cracked a smile when the young Baroness asked if they were trying to say the engagement was off, and the dark-haired chick was like, "Chill, no need to get so bent out of shape over a simple question and responsibility." The girl just dropped her gaze and gave her a dead-eyed stare, staying quiet. When asked if the Duke knew before she finally choked out that care about that stuff, quickly nodded and was like, "Yeah, everything's going great." He even cracked a smile, saying they're calling the lady a genius and the tutors are blown away by her, and the Duke just muttered that he wasn't surprised at all. Jeffrey glanced up his dull gray eyes, looking totally pissed when he heard not all the teachers were fans of his bride-to-be. Him thanking him for squeezing her in on such short notice. Edict cut her off, saying he was short on time, so they better stoke to get the gig. But she never imagined her student would be the daughter of that damn Scylla. They'd been rivals since they were kids, and the Countess knew in this chick, so she had to check it out for herself. That's why she agreed to be the tutor for palace etiquette and all that, but what was on paper was a total lie. Basically just a commoner, 'cause their family only had one real heiress, some girl named Julia. Totally sure her next words would be the kill shot. The dark-haired woman added that they were just trying to make. The woman just froze on the spot and quietly asked what he was talking about. Jeffrey reminded her that he clawed his way up through battle and became a duke, even though he started out as a nobody. He crossed his arms, shrugged, and then added that if the Countess already forgot about that, then it must not have been a big deal to her. The woman whipped around when the Duke got word that the maid Angela wanted to see him. As the guy ordered them to let the girl in, the Countess turned back, thinking it was so out of line to see a servant while she was visiting. She peeped the blue-haired maid she'd seen before, who wasn't acting all polite like she was at tea, and just waved her hand in the next lesson. She slapped a hand over her mouth, and reading the text closer, started wondering if she could actually pull off what was written. She was cool with him firing the culture and etiquette teacher. The pink-haired girl asked a little on edge if something went down, and the guy said they got an anonymous, even though she could act a little cold, was a real one. The guy said he was surprised by how much his girl put up with, especially when she totally didn't have to. Aurora nodded surprised when Jeffrey said if something like that happened again, she shouldn't just sit there and take it. The blonde dude said the girl he fell for wasn't some pushover and asked where that, and Angela was just like, it had to be done. The pink-haired girl held up a finger, saying she didn't want her taking risks like that for her again. When the lady told her not to pull stuff like that anymore, the dark-haired girl just sighed and told her to get a good night's sleep. Left hanging after he totally blew off her question, the Baroness laid down on the huge soft bed, and over. The girl slammed her hands on the bed, shut her eyes, and told herself not to let that pretty boy jerk charm her. Sitting up in the huge bed, and trying to catch her breath, Aurora blushed and thought that she just needed to remember the awesome prize at the end. She heard a noise and wondered where those weird sounds were. The girl decided to check it out, grabbed a candlestick with lit candles, and walked down the hall. Stepping out onto the staircase, Aurora stopped at the heavy doors and knocked, calling out for the Duke, but all she got back was silence. After asking again if he was in there, she froze, thinking she might have just his lady to head back to her room, and when Aurora asked why, she was told it was an order from the Duke himself. Sir Campbell turned and said that by the Duke's orders, no one chanced to hit the shops and check out the local scene. The pink-haired chick turned to him, actually thinking it over, 'cause real talk, she'd basically been nowhere her whole life. And the maid suggested they start with some grub. Listening to her for once, the future Duchess copped them some fried meat and veggies and was instantly loving the food. Sir Campbell, who was basically on bodyguard duty, could barely keep up with the girls bouncing all over the place. Then out of nowhere, she slammed the brakes on the chatter and the power walking. The pink-haired girl just froze, staring at this restaurant sign. Aurora was dead serious, like, if a place has holes in the walls, you know the food's gonna be fire. The three of them figured there had to be something way cooler hiding behind the busted exterior, but inside it was dead silent. The pink-haired girl was like, maybe this isn't even a restaurant, looks like it's closed. Her maid mumbled, yeah, looks that way. Shaking her head, the future Duchess was like, what a total bust, let's bounce. According to Wendell, the dude found out that those guys once again were not feeling the man sent to them, and straight up took his head off. The adjutant said it seemed like they weren't ready to talk things out yet, and the Duke called them some wild characters, then asked if there was any word from the Emperor. The young guy sweating bullets talking to his boss just shook his head no, so he'd rather just go handle it himself. Back with the girls, Aurora told Nephi she was back from the bakery and scored some limited edition strawberry cakes. The dark-haired girl nodded, saying she'd just made some fresh tea, perfect timing. Her guest mentioned the tea always smelled amazing. Nephi owned this restaurant, The Taste of Life, and the girl felt like she'd made her first real friend in this new world. The woman said she hoped her guest hadn't run into any trouble on the streets with all the racial tension, and she nodded it whenever they want. The girl listened, totally fascinated and kind of freaked that these people lived on the line between life and death, but she wasn't fully getting it. Aurora, a little scared, carefully asked, so like, are they zombies or something? They don't eat people, right? The woman said it was more of a symbiotic thing that no one gets. This dude in a slick white robe said the lady had a visitor, but she shot back that she'd asked for no interruptions. The subordinate apologized and said he couldn't exactly turn this guest away, and the dark-haired woman shot up from her seat. Looking at him, she apologized to her guest for having to cut their chat short like this. Could hang with whoever she wanted, but that didn't mean she should be messing with other races. Seeing the girl's shocked face, Jeffrey said he couldn't blame her because not in his turf, not anywhere. Nephi straight up called the Duke's whole act nonsense, saying if they were there to talk business, they needed to chill and do it on good terms. Jeffrey spun on the woman after that, asking if she still wanted to negotiate. Yellow Eyes wasn't even sweating it, totally unfazed by his tough guy routine, and said only if he'd actually listen. With the Duats, then listen to any more of this garbage. All of a sudden, totally fed up, Aurora smacked her future husband hard on the back, yelling, are you for real? Have you lost your damn mind? I'll be the representative, she said. But her man called her. The blonde tried to talk some sense into her, saying it was a heavy call and she might regret it not knowing. The Duke told the woman not to even get her hopes up. This was not going to go her way. The dark-haired chick just rubbed her face with her fingers and purred that if she were in his shoes, she wouldn't be talking so tough. Back at the palace, when Jeffrey asked if Aurora seriously thought she could handle the Duats, the girl just shot back, and why not? She said she didn't get why he was so pissed, 'cause if she could stop a war, then being a rep was a good thing. The man asked if she was really planning in her sleep. Taking a few more steps back, the girl muttered that it was a lame excuse, and totally ignoring him, told him not to get any closer. She listened, completely not buying it, as the dude claimed her room was right below his, and that he had some kind of super hearing saying he could prove it. The blonde dude told her to go ahead and look, how he knew everything that was going on out there, and Jeffrey came closer, explaining that he heard it all. He repeated that he had crazy sensitive hearing, so even if he wanted to, he couldn't not hear what was happening around him, and that's how he knew everything. Scratching her cheek, the girl apologized and took back the whole sick creep thing, and the man said, could promise she'd see this through to the end, and she mumbled that she couldn't, but she had to. Shaking off her worries in a second, the pink-haired girl lifted her head. World War IV for real. That was the first thing she peeped in the book. A few days later, cruising in the carriage, she remembered the part after the Duke bites it, talking about how all of humanity was toast. But now the whole vibe was way more intense, 'cause she knew he got done dirty by the Duats. The talks went south just like everyone thought, turning into a total bloodbath. which was pretty standard back then and nobody said squat about his fiancé. Now Aurora was the new MVP, and if she didn't step up, it was a straight-up death sentence for her man the Duke. If he kicks the bucket, all of mankind was gonna get wiped out in that mess, and you bet his widow wouldn't be getting a pass. Audrey wrapped her arms around herself, thinking this is why she had to just go for it, risks and all, and she gave herself a little nod. Jeffrey was just quietly watching his girl's whole vibe shift, but he had to break the silence and let her know they were there. After a quick "what's up?" Neffy told him to chill and make themselves at home, saying they weren't about that drama, and that all Duats were basically down with people. Aurora mumbled something like, "Yeah, love 'em like a snack," but the dark-haired chick shot back saying they just take a little taste and it's not like it's a dirt nap for 'em. The future Duchess kinda raised her eyebrows like, "For real?" and asked if they actually munch on people without taking 'em out. The woman was low-key blaming the Duke in her head for this, saying it looked like the lady got some bogus info about her people. She was like, "Nah, we feed on a person's deepest drive, you know, that will to live that fire that keeps 'em going." The girl was looking hella confused, asking if those poor souls would just check out if you jacked their will to live. Nephi was like, "Yeah, that's why we just take a nibble to get by." And the girl muttered under her breath that it sure as hell ain't symbiosis. The chick she was talking to closed her eyes and sighed, saying it's all about how you look at it and she didn't need to be so extra. 'Cause they'd been starving lately. The pink-haired girl asked what the deal was, and the Duat said it was 'cause the greedy-ass rulers of the world were making more and more people lose their will to even try. Looking away, the woman let out an even sadder sigh and said it meant their 5-star meals were getting harder and harder to find. When Nephi asked the future Duchess what she thought they should do to keep things from falling apart, the girl was kinda shook and didn't know what to say. Jeffrey just stared at her quiet-like, while the dark-haired woman said they needed to push people to the edge, like by kicking off a war between them. She said when it comes down to it, people suddenly get this crazy urge to live 'cause the closer they get to cashing out, the more freaked they get. Right away, the woman held up a finger and added that this was just a quick fix and didn't solve the real problem. Getting a little tired of all the yapping, Aurora leaned in a bit and asked what the real play was here. Nephi said they gotta stop letting people get played, and it'd be best if the royals themselves stepped up to fix it. She added that's why they hit up that fool Jeffrey to talk to the guy, but he curved him, and the dude muttered it was easier to just ice him, which earned him a nasty look from his girl. The dark-haired chick added that he was hella pissed. Then, cracking a smile, Nephi turned to the dear Duke and said that getting rid of them wasn't gonna be the cakewalk he thought it was. The young dude frowned and looked at her when she sweetly asked if they'd ever heard of the anti-human squad. Without even thinking, Audrey remembered reading about that crew, the same ones who ended up backing the Duke into a corner. The blonde dude said he figured she had a death wish, but she shot that down, and the Duat just smirked, saying she was way too into herself for that. After a beat, Nephi said this was exactly why they wanted to chop it up with Lady Aurora, instead of that stuffy old Duke adding that the girl could make her own call on whether to hit the Capitol or talk to the bigwigs. The pink-haired girl was totally thrown, trying to act all sweet. The woman said the lady could pull off anything, and that she had her back, but the future Duchess was cussing her out in her head. Bottom line, Nephi laid it out: if they couldn't figure something out, the only thing left on the table was war. Aurora scowled and pressed her lips together when the other chick acted all sure that the young lady wouldn't turn down the help. Later that night, Jeffrey rolled up on his girl and asked how much she'd been drinking, but she didn't say nothing, and just ran a hand through her hair, getting his attention. Holding a full glass, the girl just asked the room how you stopped the masses from getting used and if it was even possible. Walking over to her, the dude said she could just bounce, but Audrey snapped back that if she did that, a war would pop off. The blonde dude frowned, watching his fiancée drunkenly mumble about how he must be crazy if he thought she'd let that slide. Trying to change the subject, the Duke sat down across from his future wife and gently asked if she was into the SES, and the pink-haired girl slowly asked him to break that down. Jeffrey said she was probably tripping that her new friend might get got. Barely holding it together after that dinner, the girl got a little flushed from the booze and asked what he was getting at. Mulled over what he'd heard, and then slowly asked if she was scared he was gonna get taken out, and she just slammed her hand on the table like, hell yeah. The blonde dude totally trippin' said he'd never heard anything so wild 'cause he wasn't some punk who needed a babysitter. Audrey scrubbed at her flushed face with her hands and just muttered that she couldn't let this war go down and she couldn't let him get smoked. When the dude just calmly hit her with an "I get it," the pink-haired girl lifted her boozed-up eyes and was like, "What's that even supposed to mean?" Leaning in, Jeffrey coolly said that he'd play ball with these talks, and the girl was like, "For real." Eteka said they should push for more time to get their final plan straight, and the engagement party could be their cover story. Aurora shot up from her chair, slapped the table, and yelled that it was a genius idea, and she'd hit up Nephi, but the groom stressed that it'd be better to send a letter. The girl grinned, stoked they could stop the whole world from going up in smoke, then held up a finger saying, "That's a fact." Shoving her chair back, the pink-haired girl said it felt like a massive weight was off her shoulders, that she could finally catch some real Z's, but then she suddenly got all wobbly. Jeffrey shot up from his seat and grabbed his bride by the waist, catching her before she hit the deck, and told her to be more careful. Peeping Audrey, who was obviously not going to make it to bed in one piece, the blonde told her to hang on to him so she wouldn't faceplant. Aurora did what he said, but then suddenly turned beet red standing there in his arms, and you couldn't just blame that flush on the booze. A bit later, the girl was completely swamped with prep for the engagement party, which felt like a total saga. She had to do fittings for a custom dress made just for the engagement, figure out vows for her guy, and pick out the whole decor for the event. 24 hours in a day just wasn't cutting it, because on top of all that, running the restaurant was all on her plate. Plus, she had classes all damn day, and still had to figure out the Duat situation, so she was just quiet at dinner. Aurora got snapped out of her own head and her super-focused chewing when Jeffrey suddenly walked up and said her name. She asked if he needed something, and the dude just said he wanted to know why the lights were still on in the dining room this late. When he asked why his bride-to-be was grabbing a bite so late, the girl said she just didn't get a chance to eat dinner. Leaning on the back of a chair, Eteka asked if she was really that swamped, and the pink-haired girl shot back that she had a ton on her plate. The Duke told her if it was just about the party, she didn't need to sweat all the small stuff herself. She could just pass the work off to the staff. Aurora. His face while he listened to the girl say she wasn't going to drop dead or anything, and that he didn't need to trip. After a beat, the dude calmly said that from now on he wanted them to eat dinner together. Audrey whipped her head around looking at the Duke totally shocked, and asked if he wasn't going to be busy with more important stuff. The blonde dude said that work wasn't going to stop him from making time for his bride, that he'd for sure clear his schedule, and she should just hit him up. The girl couldn't even get a word out because she started wondering if she really looked that pitiful for him to go that far. From then on, Jeffrey for real never missed a single dinner together, and every night he was right there at the big table next to his bride. Starving after a long day with no chance to eat, Aurora thought the fresh bread looked crazy good as she took a bite. Stuffing her face with the warm bread, Audrey caught her groom staring at her and asked if she had something on her face. The guy said he was just impressed her cheeks hadn't exploded yet since she'd managed to stuff a huge piece in there, and she asked if it looked gross. The pink-haired girl told him not to worry, because her cheeks could totally handle it. Asking if she was sure, Jeffrey was like, "They can really stretch that." Asked if she was for real, and Audrey just shrugged and muttered that it was kinda too late to back out now. The blonde dude slowly reached his hands toward her face and told her to let him know if it hurt, and the girl promised she would. Touching her face with his cool fingers, the guy gently pulled the skin, and damn, it really stretched out like crazy super easy. Asked the girl if she was cool with that. She let out this huge sigh of relief, and muttered that of course she was totally down for that plan. Sitting back down, the guy said he'd actually shot this plan down before, so it wouldn't make her uncomfortable, and Aurora just told him to spill what the deal was. The Duke took a deep breath and said that some of the people who'd be at the reception would be the people he wanted the bride to invite. The pink-haired girl gave Jeffrey a major side-eye, totally confused, and was like, "Why me?" before she knew it, the day of the rager was here, and chest was about to be on full display. Watching her, the maid gave her a thumbs up and was like, "Nah, you're good," and the pink-haired girl just let out this massive sigh. The staff standing. Dude's voice say he was there to get her. Jeffrey, rocking a suit that was a total mirror of Audrey's fit with the same colors and patterns, was basically sparkling in front of her as they headed. Jeffrey joked that her nerves must mean he was looking extra fine today, and she was like, "Let's just focus, okay?" The Duke reminded her to flash a smile to sell the whole in-love thing, and she smiled and told him to zip it for a sec so she wouldn't get sidetracked. The guy could barely hold back a smirk that the high and mighty types would totally read the wrong way. The engagement gig in the Enberg Empire had its formal part, so they were getting ready to spit their vows to each other. Aurora was thinking how everyone there was a witness to these sacred promises, even though their whole setup was anything but. Calling her his beloved and his partner his dear Aurora, Jeffrey swore he'd never lie to her, not about a single thing. His next promise. With her eyes wide open, the pink-haired girl was like, did he really have to go that hard? Even the guests started murmuring to each other, obviously getting ready to spill the tea. To all their friends, making every girl who heard it totally freak out. The Duke said that no matter what tried to tear them apart, he'd never let go of her hand. And all the hard stuff, no questions asked. She said she'd always keep it 100 and be real with him, and no matter what, she'd always trust and respect him. At first, she'd just planned to wrap it up by promising to stick to these vows forever, but that felt way too weak now. Blushing like crazy, Aura said she'd do whatever it took to make the Duke the... Up in her throat, Aurora did what he said, and closed her eyes, feeling his warm breath on her lips. Even though to everyone else, they probably looked like a couple that had been head over heels for ages, this was actually their first kiss, and it was pretty sweet. A little later, the couple hit the party scene in some way flashier outfits, and all the young women, a straight-up homewrecker. He was the key to squashing the beef with the Duats, and all they had to do was find a legit reason to cuff him. Playing it cool, the pink-haired girl said that she'd heard a ton about him, and was like totally stoked to meet his lordship. Before she could even introduce herself, the creep just called her by name and was like, she could call him by his first name, and Audrey was like, bet. The blonde dude saw the Duke dipped and left his girl solo, so he asked if she wanted some company, and Audrey was totally on board. Barbarius was thinking he didn't expect much more from Eteka's fiancé, who seemed like a total lightweight. The dude said he'd heard all about their so-called fairy tale romance, 'cause the tea had been spilled worldwide, and people eat up those love stories. Raising his glass to her, Roland drawled that it was all thanks to a girl like Audrey. The pink-haired girl felt these tiny, shiny crystals fill up the whole space around her, and she slapped her hands over her mouth. The weird creature bounced, just as the future Duchess. She just needed to listen to his orders. Staring her down, the Count ordered her to go to her fiancé and tell him that he was her new man, and that a broke scrub like Eteka. Audrey glared daggers at Barbarius, and asked what the hell he thought he was doing. See, earlier Jeffrey had showed her a map saying most of the shady business goes down near the border, and the worst, it would only play right into their hands, and he'd still be their problem. Jeffrey, sipping his tea, said either they'd run up in his crib and snatch the official seal from his territory or he would just hand it all over peacefully. Looking at his fiancé, he said again that things might get sketchy for her during the plan and asked if she was okay with it. Audrey calmly said she'd do whatever it took to stop a war, and since he'd be right there, she knew she wouldn't be in any real danger. So now when Roland asked why she was still with it, she shot back that the creep was... The Count started tripping over his words, trying to backpedal fast, like, yo, my dude, it ain't what you think. But Jeffrey wasn't hearing any of it. That was right after the Duke straight up buckled his knee while the dude was still trying to beg, like, can we talk this out? But nah, Eteka put him to sleep for real this time, leaving everyone who saw it just shook and whispering. Peepin' Barbarius. The guy looked absolutely stoked. Watching him dip out, the pink-haired girl asked why the doc was in such a hurry to leave, figuring he just had a lot on his plate. The Duke's right-hand man declared. The girl asked if she heard right that Frenesis wasn't even human, and the young man asked if that was his name. He broke it down that they were elves living off the grid, and it was almost impossible to just run into them like that, so it was wild that this one ended up in the Count's clutches. The young man said calmly that since his lordship was grilling this elf and others too, they would for sure get the real story soon enough. Audrey looked up and asked if Jeffrey was locked up now, and the assistant said yeah, asking if she wanted him to get him. The pink-haired. And she looked at the elf totally horrified, asking if they'd messed with him. Seeing how thin and weak he was with those sunken bruises under his eyes, the girl sympathetically whispered, used him like a slave. Looking up, Aurora wondered how the Count had that kind of power over him, asking if the elf couldn't use his magic. Wendell said that the elf hadn't said a word since he got there, and that losing their voice was pretty typical for them in slavery, so he probably wasn't going to talk. When the pink-haired girl asked if he could write, the Duke's adjutant shook his head and said it seemed. Audrey shot back. Just because this being from another race can't even speak, you thought you could treat him like property? Barbarius asked, surprised. Are we talking about Frenesis? And then, if she was the Duke's fiancé, she was crossing a line asking if this was all over some dirty little elf. The pink-haired woman said menacingly, clearly you haven't learned your lesson. Barbarius ran his mouth, saying he let her get a free shot, but it wasn't happening again. Aurora shot back. You sure about that? Then whipped her leg around and cracked him right in the neck. He went down hard, slamming into the wall, and as he was groaning, Aurora stepped to him, asking how that one felt and if he was down for another round. High society chick could throw down so hard. She gave a silent shout-out to her old taekwondo classes and asked the creep what it's like to get stomped just because of who you are. He asked if she really thought she could have gotten away with it without the Duke backing her play. Aurora just crossed her arms, cut him off, and said, you know what, you're treated like trash. When the Count just stared at her, lost the future, Duchess laid it out that his twisted way of thinking is exactly what landed his butt in this cell. She went quiet and turned to leave. The blonde dude said, ever since you grabbed that punk by the collar. Barbarius just fumed, listening to his rival wonder out loud why, so bent out of shape about. He looked at her and calmly said he heard what she said, and that she seemed to actually care about other races. When he asked why his bride didn't get the how it is, but she wasn't on board with it. Jeffrey listened quietly as she said the world needs people like her to keep things from going completely sideways, otherwise it'd be nothing but hate. He gently pushed her hand away, with his barely even looking at her. The future Duchess clutched her chest, totally stung, and Jeffrey coldly remarked that if she was tired of being here, she could just bounce. Aurora thought, man, I was a total fool for worrying about him, and turned around saying she'd leave if that's what he wanted. Pissed at his attitude, the girl bounced. The Duke then asked how long Barbarius planned on playing possum, and the guy's eyes shot open. Eteka asked if the Count really didn't value his life. He shot back that the Emperor would have his back and they weren't getting away with this. The blonde dude sighed, tired of the talk, and said to just stamp the papers, pulling a document from his pocket. He showed it to his rival and said it was a land transfer, his promise to give it all back to the... He'd never let some nobody push him around. Leaning in again, the Duke asked if he really thought the Emperor could save him, looking at his busted, asking him how the lessons were going. The elf, still clutching the pen, was totally open about how stoked he was, saying straight up that he was loving everything that was going down. The notebook back to his hero, then blushed a bit as he looked up. Aurora went beet red, thinking her heart was gonna explode, and gassed the elf up, telling him how much he'd learned. The future Duchess held up a finger and asked if he was trying to say father. Audrey was like, wait, do these things even have dads? I thought they were like born from nature. And the maid mumbled that a dad doesn't have to be, biological. A while later, night hit the Duke's palace. The lights in the room started flicking off, letting everyone crash for the night. Sitting on her bed, The pink-haired girl was stewing over how Jeff still hadn't shown up to say sorry after that whole mess at the prison. Aurora wiped her face with a towel and, gonna let it slide, but this was getting out of hand. But then she saw the hallway was dead empty, and her guard was nowhere in sight. Aurora heard another crash from upstairs, and looked up wondering what the hell Jeff. Totally trashed, but she still couldn't see the guy. It was like he wasn't even in the bedroom. Stepping over the mess, the future Duchess was thinking about the noise she'd heard just a minute ago, wondering if he was hiding or something. She scanned the dark, wrecked bedroom, her eyes stopping when she spotted something way more interesting than busted furniture. Audrey crept forward. Aurora thought, okay, this is sketchy as hell, and figured Jeffrey had to be in there. She started heading down some stairs and stepped on broken glass in her slippers, muttering that she was at the guy's face as he was breathing hard and staring at the floor. Jeffrey said again for her to just bounce, and the pink-haired girl flinched back a bit, thinking, wow, rude. Aurora shot back that he was gonna need help getting down from there, and that he could at least be a little nicer, asking if he was embarrassed or something. Listening to her go off on him, the light-haired dude finally lifted his head, and his eyes were glowing this crazy bright red. The girl, totally confused, backed away from her fiancé, cause his eyes were usually just this dull gray color. Audrey crept closer, kind of freaked out and wondering what the hell was up with his eyes, asking if he was hurt or something. The dude just dropped his head, trying to get a grip, while Aurora was like, wait, could he have been? Walked over and asked if this was some kind of joke, cause if it was, the key would have been in his pocket. As the Duke kept telling her to get closer, she mumbled to herself that if he was sick, he should be, and straight up asked what just happened. She totally froze when he said they could talk about it later, and then the guy added that for now it'd be way better if she just left. All of a sudden, Jeffrey backed right into the guy, letting out a gasp that made him stop cold. The girl spun around and rushed to explain that she just tripped, that's all. But the blonde guy just shut his eyes, his head resting on her shoulder. A little while later, she was somehow dragging Jeffrey out of that dungeon, his huge arm slung over her tiny shoulder, wondering why, her even needing a key. The pink-haired girl sat up slowly on the bed and touched the cut on her leg, whispering to herself that this stupid thing stung like hell. She had no clue if he even had a first aid kit. Pulling her hand back, Audrey sat down again and mumbled that her groom seemed to have chilled out, though he still didn't look totally stable, thinking that Jeffrey was actually working. Not really thinking about it, the future Duchess just kinda noticed. His skin felt cool and nice, even though the guy himself was burning up. The next morning, the two of them were out cold, cuddled up on the huge bed under a warm grayish-blue comforter. Waking up to the bright sun, Eteka pulled his bride, peeping her, not even trying to mess with her sleep. The blonde dude was tripping, realizing yesterday wasn't some wild dream, and shot up in bed, got to his feet. The Duke threw on a baggy white robe and stepped out, calling for his right-hand man. The dude hyped that the boss and his chick were finally tight, threw his night before so she could find her man. The dude said Fran's juju didn't even touch her, so he had this gut feeling she had some kind of powers, and as he was listening to his boy, the blonde dude grumbled that it was just a wild guess and a sketchy one at that. Jeffrey crossed his arms like, so you're telling me Wendell let the... Mumbled he was ready for whatever consequence was coming, cause he knew from the jump how the boss would flip. Turning around, the blonde dude suggested the lady herself should dish out, and kinda shaky asked how he knew she was there. Jeffrey just shrugged like, told you I got crazy good hearing, and Aurora mumbled that she remembered, but damn, she didn't think it was that good. Spotting the cut on his girl's leg, the dude asked why she had a rag tied around it, and she shot back that it was medical gauze. When Eteka asked if she was hurt, Aurora shook her head and dialed in than usual, then said his girl got hurt because of him, and that was messed up. Still kinda in his arms, the pink-haired chick stared at her man's face, trying to figure out what had him so worried. Deciding to switch gears and get somewhere, Aurora said if he was for real sorry, he could just tell her the truth. After he'd rewrapped her leg, the blonde dude told her to chill for a minute and not to move while the special stuff started working. Already sitting at the table, Aurora asked if he could finally answer. Once a month, he's gotta go through some gnarly pain like yesterday, and with it comes this crazy urge to just wreck everything in sight. The dude added that he can't let, on top of everything else when she touched him, her man seemed to chill out, asking why that was. Shrugging, Eteka said he had no clue why, but it started a few years back, and all he knows is that if she didn't help, he'd just cause a scene, but he was like, just use another room. Aurora then asked why not just use the top-shelf human painkiller that was right there. Eteka just slammed his fork on the table, making a loud crack, and was clearly pissed off hearing about some human painkiller. Hopping up and kicking his chair back, the dude asked if at her feet. When Aurora snapped back, asking what kind of girl he thought she was, he said he can't stand people who try to play him when he's down. The pink-haired girl was totally crushed by that, which definitely caught him off guard. The girl said she was 100% sure that when she passed out, she was on the bed next to him, but she woke up, got cut short by a knock on the door, and Eteka spun around, sighing hard and telling him to come in. Peeping the guy in the suit standing in the doorway, the Duke asked what he wanted, and the guy said he was a messenger from the Emperor's palace. Eteka was clearly not feeling that news and knitted his brows, repeating the word. 2 more nights of payback coming, and Jeffrey asked if she thought this was some kind of joke. Eteka said the whole reason for the trip was bogus, but he couldn't exactly turn down the order and had to. Audrey said she was feeling super generous and would be happy to be his personal painkiller again, if you just ask nicely. Getting up, the Duke bowed and turning to Aurora, asked to tap into her weird powers. The pink-haired girl thought she'd be hyped to see this dude bowing to her, but instead her gut was just filled with this nasty, off-putting feeling. Once again cementing her rep as the weird girl of the crew. Getting right up in one of her co-workers' space, the blue-haired maid whispered, asking where Lady Aurora bounced to this morning, and pushed open the heavy doors ready to get the full scoop. First thing she saw was Wendell right there, all balled up with his arms around his knees, looking seriously torn up about something, asking how in the world an assistant could have put his boss's girl in any kind of danger. A little while later, the girl was standing in front of the engaged couple saying the new guy told her that the more she heard from the assistant, the more pissed off she got at him. The pink-haired chick asked if the girl had heard about Jeffrey's deal, and she said yeah, now she knows he. Jeffrey flips around and asks his girl if she's got anything cooking, and she's like, yeah, I got a thought. Angela takes a step back from the dude, and when the future Duchess calls out the adjutant's full name, he snaps to attention and dips his head. When he heard his boss lady figure, he did it 'cause he was loyal to Jeffrey, even though that ain't no excuse. She said 'cause of this whole mess she can't trust him anymore, and doesn't want the right-hand man gets the picture. He bows, clasps his hands, and is like loud and clear. And the pink-haired girl gives this little smirk but right away adds, but wait, there's more. She's letting him off easy. Standing over her new project, Angela says she can't wait for this to be a thing. She gives the dude a death stare and says all calm like that they are gonna have a whole lot of fun now that the boss gave the order. Later, while they're getting ready, the Count asks where Barbarius is at, and the Duke tells him to chill, 'cause he's already on his way. The bride's like, yo, what's the big rush? And he says the Emperor's apparently got no chill. A grumpy Jeffrey chimes in that it's all 'cause of His Majesty being so damn stubborn and the girls thinking he must be into this whole plan. The blonde dude sighs, warning her it's gonna be a pain, and Aurora's just like, nothing we can do, it's throw down. They start whispering about how the Count's got eyes on them and they better dip, and the dude quickly says it's time for him to bounce and they'll link up later. A minute later, the carriage is already rolling out the castle courtyard, the huge wheels making a racket with the horse's hooves. After a little back and forth, the muttering that he's looking kinda rough. She gently asks if he gets carsick, and the dude just shakes his head, popping the collar of his green shirt a little. Jeffrey lets out a big breath. Putting up her index finger, she says all confident like she's an expert that she can feel when it's making a difference. Aurora says that after she did that, a nice cool vibe started. They were meant to cross paths eventually, even if it wasn't some storybook romance. She strokes his hand and asks if it's weird that they've got these powers that can help each other out, even if it... Right then, the dude told her she'd regret taking his hand one day. A bit later, they had a little camp set up in the woods with a fire pit ringed by some huge boulders. Who popped out from behind a tree like, what's up? The Duke asked him for the rundown on Wendell, glancing back at the kid who'd been stuck with that hardcore maid all day. To the capital, the blonde guy who was blocking the sun from her face asked if she was up. Aurora shot up from where she was, which was basically at his feet, blushing like crazy, and was like, yo, why was I sleeping on your lap? As the carriage rolled into the city, the Duke explained that she was sleeping so hard back at camp, he just decided to let her crash. Tapping her lips, she was like, oh, okay, no big deal then, trying to play it cool and get the blush to go away. Jeffrey switched gears and were seriously bugging out from all the bling. Once they were inside, Aurora grabbed her future hubby's elbow, thinking, no way is all this gold for real. Not alone, but the blonde dude said everyone already knew his rep, so it was no biggie. The Count, who was clearly not vibing with what he heard, but let it slide, pointed with his of light, where all the lights and decor were made of diamonds, and the floor was some kind of precious ore that just bounced sunlight everywhere. Stepping inside, the pink-haired girl was basically glowing with excitement, saying it looked magical and asking if Jeffrey thought so too. The guy didn't answer, and turning to his boy, he said an audience was probably coming up soon. Special treatment. Turning to his bride-to-be, the blonde guy said she was a little off base with that thought, and that this room was actually whack. Aurora looked at her fiancé. Future Duchess asks why he didn't say squat while she was out there looking like a clown in front of the Count. With a totally bored sigh, the blonde dude says that from what he's seen before, he could bet money that they were waiting for nothing. Aurora flips out, saying they've already been waiting for 3 damn hours, asking if after all this, they're just gonna get told to bounce. For real, not feeling great, and offered a fix for it, holding out his hand to her. Audrey just gave the guy a confused look, then asked if his whole thing was acting up again and took his hand. And the pink-haired girl glanced down, just as the Duke asked if she was feeling any better. From what she remembered from the novel's plot, Eteka wasn't from some family of mages or wizards, so his abilities were a total mystery. Letting out a tired sigh, Aurora promised herself she'd grill him about it later, and the guy who wasn't feeling 100% himself was cool with that. She immediately thanked him, saying that, if the man had powers, you know? When a knock hit the door, the girl got hyped, thinking someone had arrived, but Jeffrey stood up and told her not to even get her hopes up. The servant came in, apologized for their hands. Looking down at the girl, Eteka said that to keep things peaceful, and for a bigger win later, they had to just roll with it for now. The man pointed out that if he just lost his cool and started a fight, his bride definitely wouldn't be a fan of that play, and she had to agree. Jeffrey said he had other stuff to deal with now, and she could go hit the shops and get some clothes for the hot weather since that she could pick out her own work fit. This was awesome news for the maid. She was totally stoked. Angela said she wanted to hang around to keep getting her help, and the pink-haired girl thought that was actually kind of sweet. Changing the subject, the future Duchess felt the fabrics and said they had a totally different vibe from the northern stuff. The girl said, overheard some gossip about her fiancé. She turned to the ladies who were standing behind them, spilling the tea about why His Majesty might have summoned Duke Eteka to the palace. The fair-haired lady said, all excited that her brother saw Jeffrey's ride near the castle with his own 2 eyes, adding that he hadn't been around in forever. Audrey whispered to her maid, how do these girls even know him? And Angela guessed they were probably in his fan club. The dark-haired lady suggested that Ruby came all this way just to see the Duke, and the other chimed in that it was so hyped to see true love. The ladies kept giggling and chatting about how special she was, saying they needed to set up a dinner date. Aurora just froze with a seriously pissed-off look on her, because he was into younger women. The blonde looked lost in thought while her friends just kept the conversation going, proving the guy was always the main topic. Angela whispered that the tea was getting piping hot, and the pink-haired girl felt like she was literally eavesdropping on her own man's betrayal. She heard the girls suddenly switch it up, talking about how the Duke had a fiancé now, and a massive engagement party was being planned. Aurora wondered if they even knew she existed, which would mean this Ruby chick wasn't a potential bride, but his side piece, the blonde. She was acting like she'd never seen the chick before, checking her out and asking how long she'd been in the capital, while Angela was on high alert, ready to throw down for her lady. She confirmed it was her first time in the city and said it was nice to meet her. The lady then introduced herself as Rubiana from the Duchy of Rutland, and right away, she didn't say squat even though she should have. Aurora asked if she had a problem with that, adding she wasn't even going to get into how shady her crew was. The blonde backed off when suddenly freaked out, yelling that she dared to play the Duke and lie to him just to get on his good side, even though she was a commoner. The other ladies in the shop started whispering, as was basically seen as a nobody from the streets. A bit later, the Eteka family's ride was dipping out as the sun started to set, leaving this real nice glow in the sky. Random commoner, it made the pink-haired girl seriously wonder what kind of dirt she had on her. She wrapped her arms around herself, pissed about how the whole scene at the store went down. Then all of a sudden, she heard someone off to the side ask, "So you dig it?" She spun around and saw Jeffrey holding his hand out for his girl, ready to finally lead them into the building. As he pulled out a chair for her, Eteka mentioned this spot was the hottest restaurant in the capital and a total go-to for married couples. The pink-haired girl squared her shoulders, looked him in the eye, and asked, "Was just for show to make it look like they were a real couple?" The guy's brow furrowed a little and he said, "I get how it might look that way, but honestly, that wasn't part of the plan." He told her he brought his fiancé, restaurant for crying out loud. Then she was like, "Hey, there's something I gotta say." The blonde guy speared a piece of meat with his fork and looked up at his bride-to-be, kind of guessing what was coming, and asked why she was asking such a dumbass question. The pink-haired girl got all nervous and tried to play it off like a joke, saying she just heard it somewhere. The Duke doubled down, saying he had never even thought about anything like that. Aurora told him she had one more question, and the guy wiped his mouth with a napkin, gave her the go-ahead, probably wondering what else she was gonna hit him with. Straightening up from the or anything like that. The blonde dude's face went dark like a legit thundercloud, and he demanded to know who had the balls to talk to her like that. When the pink-haired girl asked him why he didn't just say something sooner. The Duke put his fork down and told her that her old etiquette coach, some lady named Curtis Roseman, was the one who spilled the beans. According to this woman, she was tight. Aurora, feeling kind of bummed, quietly asked why he never just asked her about her background himself instead of staying quiet. The guy shot back that it wouldn't have done any good anyway since the girl had amnesia, and then he added, if his bride had dropped into the Empire from the sky. The pink-haired girl thanked him for trusting her because it seemed sketchy, and he probably wanted to kick out someone so worthless. The Duke quickly shook his head and said with calm confidence that he had never even thought about such things that way. Aurora said that was good news and then asked what they should do. The pink-haired girl suggested doing everything possible to completely ruin their family name. That evening in the palace, the girl left the papers on the table and placed a fountain pen on top, declaring that this, in her opinion, should be enough. Aurora stood up and said that if the temporary contract was drawn up, then it was time for her to hit the hay, but Jeffrey asked her to wait. The girl muttered that they might find it weird if the bride suddenly left the groom to sleep in the guest room, and he agreed. The pink-haired girl reminded him that according to the contract, stay in the capital even for the previous night. She covered her mouth with her hands in awe when the man added that compensation was included with this amount and everything was already suggesting they go to bed. The pink-haired girl stepped toward the bed and stated that this day had been super tiring, and the Duke said he understood. Aurora heard the ringing and declared he would sleep on the sofa. She called him to go to bed. Looking up, the blonde man asked why she was so eager to get him into bed, and Audrey hesitated awkwardly. The pink-haired girl said she was afraid they might accidentally lose contact, and the Duke froze in place, distracted from linking the long chains. She asked if he hadn't thought about it himself, and then said that if the man understood everything, then he should come to her before his eyes turned red. After thinking about all this for a while, Eteka began to untangle the chains and said that in that case he needed to change the limiters. Jeffrey began to rummage under the bed and then took out and opened a small chest that contained chains and shackles of all kinds. The pink-haired girl asked what he was doing, and hearing the answer that it was a precaution, the man asked if she could help him with the handcuffs, and he seemed so calm as if it was a completely normal thing. Immediately distracted, he remembered something and handed his bride a thin chain with a pendant explaining that first she needed to take this. Holding the decoration, Jeffrey explained that it was a starstone amulet with magic, and if she sensed danger, it would protect him. He expressed hope that she would wear it every day, and Aurora accepted the gift, asking if he had chosen the color himself. Eteka confirmed this assumption, and hesitantly asked if she didn't like it, trying to find the answer in the bride's eyes. The girl said that on the contrary, if they, pushing her pink hair over her shoulder and allowing Eteka to place the pendant around her neck. The blonde man said that he had put everything on and asked if she wanted to look at herself, and Aurora replied that now was the time to get to work on the handcuffs. Handling the man with more care than was necessary, the pink-haired girl snapped the handcuff shut, nervous for some reason. Mumbled something about killing the lights then. The Duke just nodded, totally down with that. A minute later, they were all cuddled up under one blanket holding hands, while Audrey, sliding one arm under her head and rubbing her cold hands with his other one. The whole castle was dead silent, but she couldn't chill, especially when Jeffrey told her there'd be fly. She crawled out from under the covers, sat up and realized she was flying solo. Peeking at the empty side of the bed, the pink-haired girl wondered out loud. Said why wouldn't he bring breakfast for his girl? A whole spread with scrambled egg sandwiches and salad. Now sitting at the stuffy-ass table and digging in, Audrey asked if they were gonna hit up the palace today, but Jeffrey said the Emperor was swamped. Totally annoyed, and over the Emperor's shade, the pink-haired girl asked when the hell they could make it happen then. The Duke said in a couple of days, 'cause the big boss is just like that. Aurora asked if they were really gonna serve up Count Barbarous. Her man said it's all good, even that her sandwich. The girl muttered that sometimes she just straight up didn't get him. Hearing her fiancé could make a problem disappear, Aurora got all nervous and said she was grateful he had her back. And he replied that he was down to do whatever it takes, but he'd rather she just ditch those meetups while she was still focusing more on her food than the heavy convo they were having. The pink-haired girl asked why things had to be this way. Popping a piece of tomato in his mouth, Eteka said his girl would probably get messed with, and they didn't need that drama. Audrey totally froze, hearing that people who bought the rumors might throw shade or be straight up hostile to her. Deciding to switch up her game, Aurora played it cool, saying nah, it's fine, and that it'd be better to just show up and shut down the gossip. The blonde dude asked why she thought so, and his bride shot back that, you know what they say? High society is a straight-up snake pit. So she was basically thrown to the wolves for the first time when all the ladies there pretended they were stoked to meet the future Duchess. They barely said what's up before they started grilling her, asking if it was true the Duke hooked her up with a few thousand roses. The young blonde was all giddy, saying she heard some dude gave his girl a ring with a rock the size of a fist over in the Martianus Mardella gardens. They all agreed a piece like that would be way too extra to wear, which is why the future hubby gives slightly different kinds of gifts. The girl squad had a pretty diverse crew, which was perfect for pulling off her whole plan. Her new friend pointed out that the future Duchess's necklace with that insane starstone totally made her eyes pop. The pink-haired girl said it was a gift for her first time hitting the capital, and get this, the things even got a spell on it. The blonde was like, whoa, protective charms made of stuff that rare are hard to come by. And another chick added that the Duke was being super generous to his girl. After that, one of the girls slammed her porcelain cup down on the saucer, basically making everyone look at her. Both of the other girls just stared at her, surprised when the lady said you could say Eteka has a really big heart, I guess. The blonde stranger muttered that the Duke took her in despite her background, and her friend told her not to be so harsh. The dark-haired woman just smirked, saying that even if the Duke's fiancé was from some no-name family, she's still gotta be treated like royalty now. Sipping her tea, totally bored, Aurora thought about how she already had the 411 on these girls in Ruby's clique. Sighing, one of them, Sarah the blonde with her hair in a bun, was like, didn't seem too shocked probably, 'cause they were low-key waiting for this drama to pop off. Casually sipping her tea, the pink-haired girl stayed completely cool and just said she thought they had it all twisted. Sarah looked like she totally lost the plot on her plan to shame the girl, and was like, wait, what do you mean we got it twisted? Aurora said, bored, that she wasn't planning on dealing with this mess today, but if they were gonna push it, she'd shut down the rumors right now. The girl explained that their family had been looking after a sick peasant woman for a while, 'cause they just couldn't turn the poor thing away. Peeping the shook faces on the girls, most of whom she didn't even know, she thought you gotta fight fire with fire, not with some BS lie. Deciding to go big or go home to kill any more gossip, Aurora stood up, and the future Duchess announced that Julia was the commoner everyone had been whispering about, adding that she had no clue how that rumor even got started. Then she slid over and smoothly put her arm around Countess Rosamund's shoulder, saying she had someone who could back her up. Smiling sweetly, Aurora said that this woman was an old friend of her mom's, and asked, you know the real story, right? Nodding, the dark-haired woman confirmed that she'd even a really classy one. Tapping her fingers on her lips, the pink-haired girl added that she might not be perfect, but she was trying her damn best to be a good bride. Ruby's friends froze when she asked if they were just spreading fake news to throw shade at her. Aurora added that before she even asked why, it'd be cool to hear an apology. After that whole awkward scene, the dark-haired girl went pale and mumbled an apology to the future Duchess, cause she definitely didn't want any more heat. Sarah backed her up, swearing they didn't know anything and weren't trying to cause drama for her, and she accepted their apology. Putting her hands up, Aurora said that now that they've cleared the air, she hoped they could all be like actual friends. Turning, she nodded again and thanked Lady Roseman, saying the whole nasty situation got sorted out only because of her. The woman looked totally chill. The pink-haired girl asked if the woman was shook, saying it looked like she'd seen a ghost. Covering her laugh, Aurora told her not to freak out, explaining she was only there to, put a little pressure on her. Countess Roseman was totally losing it over the nerve, cause some girl she knew as a nobody dared to threaten her. She stepped to Duke, at her, and said the lady needed to swing by the Marquis Martella's estate for afternoon tea. The dark-haired girl listened like she knew she just had to roll with what the future Duchess was saying, and she wouldn't even have to straight-up lie. The woman sighed and asked if the girl would back off her family if she did this, and Aurora was like, word is bond. That night, she spilled the tea to Jeffrey and their crew about the plan she pulled off, and everybody had a totally different take. Wendell was all stuttery like, wait, so you're saying the lady actually managed to flip the script and make the real Miss Audrey look like a nobody? The girl said that's what you call karma, and they needed a taste of it, and the aide was like, my lord's got nothing to sweat. Looking from the young dude to her future hubby, the pink-haired girl asked, all surprised, for real you were worried? Wendell threw his hands up like, worried, that's the understatement of the year. Ever since you bounced, the Duke's been blowing up my spot about everything. Just as the dude was about to say more, Jeffrey stomped. Get back to Audrey. Aurora said if he could really pull that off, that's awesome. And the Duke was like, I'd do anything for you, babe. Peeping her maid, giving her the side eye, the girl asked, what's up? And Angela shot back, how long are y'all gonna hold hands? The future Duchess said she knew what the maid was getting at, adding they'd been like this since sunset. When she found Jeffrey, he had giving the Duke a real suspicious once-over. Angela asked if he was really still hurting that bad. Aurora turned to her fiancé when he was stalling on an answer, and she was clearly not used. The girl shut up real quick and dropped the attitude when she heard her boss, who told her to check herself. Jeffrey mumbled that he wasn't really feeling the maid as a sidekick for his girl, and his bride was mentally screaming at him to shut it. Aurora just watched stunned as Angela and her future hubby started going at it. This whole convo was pointless, telling her to save it for her actual partner. Like she finally snapped out of it. The blonde whispered that her lady was right and covered her. Audrey was already chasing her maid down the hall, calling her name. The girl asked her lady if she was sure she should be here and not with her dude, and she replied, fidgeting with her fingers and looking down. The pink-haired girl asked if Angela had heard all that noise going around about her not actually being a noble. She added that she wasn't really a member of. Watching how worked up the future Duchess was getting about all this. Leaning in, Angela was like, what are you even talking about? 'Cause right now you're on the fast track to getting paid. Time anyone had ever said something like that to her. The girl promised she was gonna make it big, and then make her maid the richest chick on the planet, and then she just pulled her into a big happy hug. Couldn't just get blown off. The Duke added that she could basically just forget everything he said, and she asked, surprised, why, right as their escort knocked on this huge-ass door. The guy explained that whatever the Emperor says is usually just a bunch of hot air. The big dude chilling on the throne got the news that Duke Eteka and his new boo had arrived for a meeting. Clutching her fiancé's hand, Aurora was thinking how that little heads-up about the Emperor was just making her even more freaked out. After a quick bow, the girl greeted His Majesty. Dude's face wasn't exactly screaming genius, and his eyes had this vacant look that pretty much gave away he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. When Audrey first saw him, she tried to that he already gave him the punishment he deserved, which was basically being grounded in the palace for 3 months. The blonde dude, totally annoyed, asked if that was seriously it, while his fiancée silently wondered if he wasn't even going to jail for this. The ruler asked what more the Duke wanted, and he shot back, asking if Count Barbarius shouldn't be punished for straight-up ripping off the people. The Emperor asked if they knew that, like, everybody makes mistakes sometimes. Leaning in, Aurora suddenly hit His Majesty with, letting people die isn't exactly... The pink-haired girl shot back that letting people starve to death is the same as killing them, and as a lord, it was his job to look out for his people. The guy just dragged out his words, repeating that like he already said it was just a little mistake, and Audrey thought to herself, this dude is a deaf clown. Aurora laid it out that a mistake is when you accidentally do something and try to fix it right away, but The dude replied, that's what he liked about her. After a beat of silence, the monarch just stared at them, and then suddenly announced he just had a totally brilliant idea. The pink-haired woman was like, wait, you talking about me? And the guy confirmed that was the only way he'd even listen to what they want. Aurora sighed and asked who exactly was coming from the kingdom, and told him to just leave it to him. Muttering like a stubborn goat, the guy shot back that he didn't want to, and that in his opinion the Duke's fiancé would totally handle it better. At the top of his lungs that he already said this girl was going to be the one to do it, period. Still screaming, he declared that if she didn't, he'd let Count Barbarius walk like right now. And he was throwing such a fit that his crown actually fell off his head. Totally shocked at how this dude went from just stupid to completely unhinged, Aurora thought, damn, this guy needs an exorcist. A legit strong leader for the country. A little while later, all the palace staff was scrambling to get ready for his arrival because this guest was a major player in the political game. And Homegirl was seriously wondering how Enberg was even still a thing. The future Duchess was like, so, no escorts. And when he said nope, she asked, am I supposed to go find people myself or what? This dark-haired servant who was giving off major dumb as a box of rocks vibes just deadpanned that if the lady needed help, she should go get it. Aurora threw her hands up like, for real, who's even going to be at the negotiations? Then if not me. The Duke of Rudland, while the Duke himself was just locking eyes with her, a real intense stare. The blonde dude asks, who's this? And it hit Aurora that, oh, the feeling was mutual, he had no clue who she was either. And he asked why she was even there and what she was up to. The pink-haired girl laid it out straight. She was in charge of greeting the delegation and could really use some pointers. That a man wanted to hash out official diplomatic business in such a public spot. The girl asked if he wasn't even a little worried about relations with the gear people, and the blonde guy just gave a bored reply. Aurora explained she wasn't asking for the world, just for some seasoned pros to be assigned to the reception. Looking nervously at her new acquaintance, the future Duchess practically begged him for permission to give her a shot. After mulling it over for a sec, the blonde dude finally caved and said he could hook the girl up for this event. And now she was getting a sketchy vibe. A little later, some blonde-haired lady came up and was like, it's a huge honor to meet the future Duchess, Miss Aurora. The girl kept going, practically yelling with energy, introducing herself as Eloise Caproni from the International Relations team. Audrey tried to say it was nice to meet her too, that she'd only been on the job for a week and might be a little green. She literally face-palmed and tried to hide how ticked off she was, muttering, yeah, great to meet you too. Letting Eloise take a seat, the future Duchess was already plotting how to get back at Rudland, asking if the newbie had any experience in this area. She said her experience was like off the books, saying she didn't mean to be so casual. Aurora just shrugged cool as a cucumber and said, it's all good. It's totally normal, you don't need to walk on eggshells around me. The girl thanked the Duchess, saying she was psyched to be working with her. A few days later, Audrey was still grinding, buried under huge stacks of paper, just reading and rereading them over and over, instead of just sitting there staring at her 24/7. The blonde dude just sighed and was all chill, saying he was just worried his girl was going to pass out before the delegation even showed up. Just the best spot for her to grind. Eteka crossed his arms and was like, it's not about my sleep, fam. The real issue is you're just wasting your time on this anti-human squad. Homegirl frowned, her eyebrows all scrunched up, and she even pouted when he asked if she was really pinning her hopes on that. Getting up, Aurora shot back, asking if they were supposed to, hearing him say that even if they teamed up with Joker, it was basically game over for everyone. Aurora just snapped, yelling at him, asking why he'd say that, and if he got a kick out of trashing everything she'd been working for. Jeffrey was tripping over his words, trying to answer, but she just kept going, shouting that she was doing everything she possibly could to find a way out of this mess. Pack his stuff and find another room far away from her. The blonde tried to get Aurora to chill, but she shot back like, you think couples in love never fight, adding that it didn't change their. Aurora was wailing on the pillow with just froze midair, and she started blushing like crazy, stopping cause she totally didn't see those thoughts coming. Then she started smacking the poor pillow to argue, but Eteka said he should probably just get out of her face. The pink-haired girl reached out and called his name to stop him, but he wasn't having it, and just walked out. The next morning, the delegation's ship had already docked at the imperial port of Enberg for some big-shot political meeting. Standing a bit, wondered, looking totally bummed if he was really that bent out of shape. Luna mentioned that the trip had been a long one. The lady said that the feeling of this pleasant sea breeze, which was barely held on with a flimsy bow. The girl made a grab for it, but had no chance. The thing soared way up, caught in the wind, and she tried to keep her eyes locked on it. Aurora clutched the bottom of her blue dress and hustled forward so she wouldn't lose it. She stopped dead at the foot of the stairs when some guy's hand snagged the hat out of the air, and an unfamiliar but kinda nice voice asked if it was hers. This dude with brown hair, green eyes, and a fly get-up to match was smiling at her. Turns out he was the Prince of Joke here, who'd just saved her hat from getting ghosted. The pink-haired girl thanked the guy for the save, and he was super chill and polite right back. The people running up behind him were calling him Prince. Gear and the dude looked kinda surprised, asking if she knew who he was. Putting a hand to her chest, she confirmed it and said she was there to get him to the palace safely, then dropped her full name. Aurora just said it was the least they could do, and that she was glad he liked it. Pointing toward the exit, the pink-haired girl said it was time for them to head over and grab some lunch. Aurora nervously waved her hands, trying to stop another awkward moment from happening, and turned to him, swallowing hard with embarrassment. The prince just suggested that maybe she'd found the usual stuck-up aristocrats and was actually super cool. When Jean took a bite and said he was really digging it, Audrey replied that she was glad he liked the food. A little later, the future Duchess was been so calm and collected the whole day. Thinking about her own fiancé who could get set off in a split second, the pink-haired girl thought how dope it would be if he was more like that as she sank. Water. Hiking up her dress, the pink-haired girl waded into the water, thinking Jeffrey was probably here, but he definitely wasn't having this much fun. Dipping her head and listening. To the chill sound of the waves, Aurora wondered if they could ever just hang here like this. The girl totally froze up when she heard her name and whipped around. If she was out for a little night stroll, and the pink-haired girl said she just wanted to cool down before hitting the hay since the weather was so dope. The brunette asked if she was feeling the ocean. And Aurora paused for a sec, then was like, she doesn't get to catch a view this sick very often. Looking around, she didn't spot any security and was like, wait a minute, was he really out here with no guards this late? Jean kind of hesitated and laughed a little, then scratched the back of his neck, basically confirming what the future Duchess was thinking, that he'd just dipped. The brown-haired dude grabbed the sleeve of her dress and was like, yo, wait up, saying he'd been out here for a minute, still holding on to his new friend, and hiked up her bare leg to show him. Still holding up the hem of her wet dress, Aurora said with a chill smile that now they were both soaked. After chatting and walking for a bit, the two, a friendly nation. They seemed like buddies now, and in the courtyard a whole crew of servants and other delegation members were there to meet them. As soon as the prince helped the girl out of the ride holding her hand, Jeffrey rolled up and greeted the Empire's guests. Aurora looked up totally shook at her future husband who hadn't even... She was low-key, ready to snatch her fiancé's hair for that salty look on his face, even though he was supposed to be open, and everyone in the room whipped their heads around. The girl was about to say hey to her fiancé and started to get up, but Jeffrey just put a hand up and calmly told her to stay put. Audrey asked, is the meeting? Figured maybe he was feeling better. The Duke pointed out that she looked beat, and the girl leaned her head back on the couch saying she seriously needed to just crash in her bed for a... Looking totally shook his hand still hanging in the air. As the prince and his crew dipped from the palace heading for the Imperial Garden, the young dude was like, this whole thing is a total mindbender. John chimed in that he got how politics could be messy, but right now he was just lost. The pink-haired chick couldn't shake the feeling that their whole chat was pretty much a... Dude laid it out, plain anti-human forces were breathing down their necks, and if they didn't cut a deal, humanity might not make it. Spinning around Jean was like, this is the exact reason. He said there had to be a reason she was the one tasked with greeting a whole crew from another country. Aurora asked if they'd picked a negotiator yet, and the guy said, curious about what the future Duchess had to say. The only one who could go toe-to-toe with the royals and actually get stuff done was her bold-ass fiancé. Looking up, the girl was like, it's gotta be a better fit than the Duke of Rutland. Mumbling that he was thinking the same thing, the prince thanked her for helping him get his head on straight, and she was like, happy to help. Dude stopped, put his hands together, and asked if she wanted to be his +1. The future Duchess started blushing hard, cause she never in a million years thought she'd get an invite from some foreign prince. Jean, smiling all smooth, said that rolling up to the party with her would be a huge honor. The girl was just shaking her head and hands totally bugging, cause she was already engaged, and he looked genuinely shocked. She added that her fiancé was Jeffrey Eteka, and the green-eyed dude just nodded like he got it, repeating the lucky Duke's name. Aurora kinda stammered, admitting that nah, that hadn't happened. Jean blushed a little and was like, so I should shoot my shot right, cause if he brought any other girl, everyone would start. Let Prince Jean roll up to his own party stag. The girl told him she was in, and Jean literally clapped his hands, showing her how hyped he was. Was someone bringing him a cake? And what was he even supposed to do with it? The girl explained it was a gift from his fiancé, and if he wasn't feeling it, she'd just take it back. But the dude snatched the box right up. Push herself so hard she was gonna get worn out. Jeffrey froze solid when he saw his bride's face all flushed and heard her ragged breathing, which pretty much confirmed she was sick. Pulling her close with one hand and touching her face with the other, the Duke felt a wave of fear, realizing how bad of a fever had taken over her whole fragile body. Aurora's sleep looked anything but peaceful. She was on Jeffy's hand on the pillow. The pink-haired girl mumbled out loud, her eyes still closed, that this was actually pretty chill. A stressed-out Ika leaned over her and asked if she was coming to, but all she could manage was to ask him not to move his hand. He got it instantly and brushed his fingers against her cheek, whispering, how you feelin'? His robe so the hug would really work, and then slid into bed under the covers with his bride wrapping his arms around her body that was burning up from a crazy high, her face dropping in shock, and her eyes going wide when she heard Eteka say he was truly sorry. The girl said it was all good, cause he'd already helped her out of a tight. That would be more than enough payment. Just like that, her whole playful happy vibe died. The pink-haired girl swallowed hard and stammered that she was really, really sorry. She explained that she'd already told Prince John she'd go with him to the party, and the Duke just stared at her completely blindsided. A little later at lunch, the girl was just stirring her spoon in some cream of parties, so she agreed to go with Jean. The maid looked shocked to hear that Ika got super bummed out by the news right after they'd finally patched things up from their last fight. He announced that this was supposed to be their first party together, but his fiancé got snatched right out from under him. Freezing with a fork in her hand, the girl muttered that she hadn't even considered what people would think, and the maid was like, yeah, I'm not surprised. Later that night, she was just walking through the garden quietly trying to figure out what to do next. While she was tripping on whether to ditch the prince's offer, Jeffrey just popped up beside her, asking if his girl was thinking about hooking up with him instead. The pink-haired chick looked up. Just dropped today. The blonde dude asked if it was a bad look, and Aurora checked him out again, totally blushing, and was like, nah, not at all. The Duke was shook that this laid-back look, his usual vibe, actually worked for him, thinking all awkward that he looked low-key hotter like this. Audrey shot up a finger and was like, no, for real, it's a total vibe on you. Now that she was really thinking on it. She could even picture the Duke rocking the prince's gear, and he'd still kill it. When it got dead quiet for way too long, the dude called out Aurora's, and besides, nobody's gonna buy her becoming a princess anyway. The dude crossed his arms and was like, you really believe that? And Aurora just said she went along with what the prince wanted. Nah, don't trip, I'm not salty. Popping her finger up again, Audrey said they had more to talk about, and the Duke was like, go on. She said she put in a good word for... The pink-haired girl kinda dodged the question, saying the prince was good-looking, and couldn't help but picture how the brown-haired dude looked when he smiled and said her name. Tapping her finger on her lips, she mused out loud that Jean was sweet, thoughtful, and smart, and honestly, she'd rather see him run the whole show as emperor. Glaring at her with some serious hater vision, the blonde dude figured that. The pink-haired girl was sulking, wondering how whack she'd look with 2 dates, and who was even gonna dance with her. Out of nowhere, Jeffrey said, first dance is mine, and that he had 0 plans. Hearing the Duke say his girl wasn't gonna burn herself out for other people, and definitely not on his watch. Checking out the look on the blonde dude's face, walking over to his girl, Eteka held out his hand and asked if he should call a doc since she was hurtin', but she just said she needed to chill. Lacing their fingers together real careful, the blonde dude mumbled he'd just hold her hand till she crashed. The girl blushed, thinking how the guy totally knew she wasn't sick anymore, but still agreed to be close to her like this. Peeping at her man, Aurora thought that even with his whole cold front, the Duke was for real warm inside like the sun. Then the pink-haired girl's eyes popped open. Aurora threw her hands up like, my bad, feeling super awkward, even though this whole scheme wasn't her idea. She figured any sane person would call out this whack plan in a hot second. Scoping out the scene and happily announced they'd made it. The girl said this part of the Empire's capital, Rockstein, is known all over for being a total knockout. Jean enthusiastically added that the future Duchess should totally roll through his homeland sometime, and the pink-haired girl replied that she'd be down. The man was about to say they'd made, and just mumbled something. Yanking the map from her pocket, she unfolded it, and told him to give her a sec, and the prince just laughed, telling her to take her time. She peeped the map and said the area was called Landa, but it was pretty off the grid, which explained why it was so dead quiet. The green-eyed dude smiled, totally vibing with her, and he told her not to set foot in that area. The girl asked if the place was really that sketchy, and Campbell confirmed it, saying they needed to tread super carefully. Aurora? The assistant said she'd only heard whispers. Audrey froze, looking seriously bummed to hear that every noble knew about this broken, dangerous neighborhood. Just a minute ago, they were cruising down bougie, lively streets, and the Imperial Palace was just dripping with wealth. She couldn't help but think about the refugees and how jacked up their situation must be if things were this bad even in the capital. It clicked for her that the Emperor was going easy on Barbarius because he was scared it would set a precedent that would mess a lot of people up. Peeping the scene? Jean muttered that they should probably bounce, and Aurora turned to His Highness the Prince. Girl remembered her fancy clothes, mentally thanking her lucky stars that people weren't chucking rocks at them. When a familiar guy's voice called her name, she turned around and His Majesty looked kinda shook. To know it was for real him and she wasn't just bugging, and the guy said he needed the tea on something, hinting at the prince. The Duke was like, yo, who sent you here? And not bother the guy. Jeffrey shot back that he was totally free, and his fiancée had been hanging with the prince all day, so she deserved a break. Closer by her jacket. Audrey angrily whispered that he needed to show some damn respect and answer His Majesty like right now. Hearing her out, the blonde dude turned to the prince and said straight up that he didn't agree, and everything was going down exactly as planned. Eteka let out a heavy sigh, looking hella irritated when he heard the prince ask what he meant, like he had nothing else to say, and the room went dead silent for a second. Eteka added, sounding bored, that the prince clearly didn't know jack about the Empire, and that could totally bite him in the ass during the negotiations. But since Enberg wasn't gonna make a move, they must want something from Gare. Turning to Duke Eteka, the prince gave him a confused look and replied that he was just trying to give a nice gift. The Duke declared that the gift would be kept safe and sound in a storage room, and the prince clapped back that Aurora could decide that for herself. Totally prep everything based on that info. Aurora said that way they could coordinate all their outfits to look good together, and both guys went dead silent. Was pulled from his thoughts when the pink-haired girl asked if he knew Adele was considered the flyest district in Rockstein. Lost in her own world, the girl quietly asked a question about how the people who are forced to just watch all this from the sidelines must feel. The blonde-haired man replied that it's the same story everywhere, 'cause the elites don't give a damn about the... He threw him a bone to keep him distracted from the whole revolution vibe for a minute. The pink-haired girl was like, you could have just said you were helping people out instead of being so extra about it. Back at the crib, Jeffrey let her know the butler dropped off a letter for her, and she scooped the message right off the table. The girl's quick fingers slid the paper out of the white envelope, wondering what kind of tea was in this letter. Glancing over the message, the pink-haired girl mumbled that her walk into that tea party with some serious confidence. The girl asked when the party dress would be good to go, and Angela, juggling all the gifts, said it just needed a few tweaks while grabbing the bling from the box. The future Duchess was like, "Y'all double-checked the colors, right?" And the maid was like, "Yep," as she put on the earrings. Aurora thanked her girl and remembered that the dress from the prince, dripping in jewels. Aurora was like, "It's gorgeous, I'll rock it next time," telling her to put it away safe for now, and the maid nodded. The girl smoothed out her slick purple dress, which felt crazy good against her skin, and she couldn't help but smile. Audrey squared her shoulders, grabbed the edge of her dress, and announced with a grin that it was, since charity was kinda their thing anyway, the effort would totally be worth it. The women just gave each other a look when they heard that being kind and merciful were supposed to be the main values of their big-shot empire. The girl cracked a smile, even got a little red when she saw her plan was a go. A minute later, she's strolling down this covered hall and freezes because someone's calling her name from behind. One rule in her crib. The redhead said, "Nobody here plays games, we keep it 100, meaning this lady better be straight up," but Audrey just stayed quiet. The Marchioness asked the girl what she thought. "Actually do it, cause their world is run by dudes, you know, the heads of the families." The Marchioness added that's why she wanted to get her own title, but she lost out in the fight for the inheritance, and that the Shadow District was just the tip of the iceberg. She asked the young girl if she thought she was being extra, and the pink-haired girl mumbled back, "Nah, not at all." To use her tea party to push an agenda like that, and the girl just said she was only floating the idea. The woman added with a soft smile that she's been keeping an eye on the young lady since the last get-together, and her moves since then had been mad impressive. Audrey was completely floored when she heard the question of whether she'd roll with the Marchioness to stop society from crashing and burning, to face her man. The girl said that the little tea party she hit up at Marchioness Mardella's place was fire. She kept the real details on the down low because the redhead insisted. The blonde dude asked if his fiancé had plans for tomorrow, and she said yeah, she was busy because she'd already promised Mardella she'd link up. The Duke looked a little salty about that news. So real. The girl suggested, "Well, in that case, I can just bounce home early if you're cool with that." And Eteka was down. The pink-haired girl was just thinking how freaking cute he was when he kept it real, and she got all hyped, hoping things would be smooth sailing from now on, and hiked up her dress again as she bolted out the door, trying not to be late. Later, she was staring at the doors of the slick-looking spot that was their HQ, and couldn't help, in the room. Greeting her new guest, the redhead cracked a smile and said they'd been waiting on the future Duchess. Aurora shot the same vibe right back, looping her arm through the young lady's elbow. The woman gently turned her and told the ladies to say what's up to the new player in their joint project. She introduced her to the women at the numerous desks scattered around the room, all sorting through papers. The spot where these ladies were plotting to solve such heavy problems was right under the boutique, and nobody would ever suspect a thing. A fair-haired lady in a gray dress stood up and grabbed her new acquaintance's hands, welcoming her. She quietly asked what the teapot was all about. The girl was quick to explain, right in front of her, who greeted her and said that ever since tea they'd been hyped for this meeting. The future Duchess walked up to the woman and said for real that she was glad to see her. The gray-haired woman gave the same energy back, looking up from what she was reading. Handing a paper to the new recruit, the Countess said it was the blueprint for a new project, work they'd use their network to hook them up with jobs. The girl flipped through the almost finished plan and thought the more she heard, the more impressed she was. Situation with Audrey's family, so the girl shouldn't even sweat it. Instantly remembering these ladies had no clue about her real story, the pink-haired girl just flashed a bright smile and thanked Mardella. She wondered if she could keep her secret on lock, deciding that as long as nobody in her family tried to blow up her spot, everything would be cool. Grabbing a glass of wine, the redhead said the new member had another gig to handle, and again told her to follow. Pouring wine into a second glass, the woman said that right now it was this war or not. Holding a glass, Aurora asked what a successful negotiation even meant, and Mardella shot back military cooperation. Running her pen across the map, the Marchioness Eka was up north, and she replied that the Mardells weren't just sitting around either. The redhead made it clear that no matter what, they didn't have a 100% guarantee they could protect those would be in time. Aurora straight up asked if the real reason they were helping her was just so she could round up more people to help the Empire. The Marchioness confirmed that was exactly the helped them score a hookup like that. Audrey was clearly pissed, hanging her head, and just thinking how Cornelia's whole take was logical and real but cold as hell. None of them had the right to be playing God, trying to decide who gets to live and who dies in the war that was coming. The Marquis said if they sliced up the land that way, Gear would get a piece of the action too, which would be a real sweet deal for the prince. Aurora mumbled something about how she wasn't even in the mix, but Mardella shot back that even if that was true, the girl was still the Duke's point person. Checking out the new guy, the redhead added that word on the street was he's totally whipped for his fiancé. She was like, for real, if he wasn't, would the Duke him to spit it out. When the kid said the lady shouldn't have spilled the beans to his fiancé about his birthday, he just brushed it off. His aide then asked if his lordship was cool with them skipping dinner, and he just told him to hit him with the intel he'd found. Wendell said he did a deep dive on Angela's background and came up with nothing shady suspicious. Aide was like, got it. The young guy was about to ask if he could bounce, but their whole chat got cut short when the office door just flew open way later and asked if she'd eaten, but she just shook her head no. Wendell dipped, and Audrey answered her man's question explaining she didn't bail early cause froze solid when she asked if he could even imagine how messed up it was for her to find out about his birthday from somebody else. Thinking back to when they left the house, earlier Aurora realized all those gift boxes with the bows must have been for him. She said all bitter that even people who barely knew him got him presents, but she was left scrambling to find something at the last minute. She added that the best she could do was a small bouquet of flowers, and Jeffrey asked again if something had happened. But she just kept going on about her freak out the pink-haired girl saying she didn't even know what he liked or what to get for him. The blonde replied that he wasn't really picky, adding that besides his fiancée's gift was already his favorite. Aurora's head snapped up and she yelled, "Are you kidding me? You haven't even opened the other gifts, I'm not blind." Jeffrey suddenly reached out and touched her chin with his fingers and said her name, telling her to look at him and cutting her off mid-rant. The Duke asked her to forgive him, explaining that none of it was real, so he just didn't think about it or crying. Jeffrey calmly pointed out that her nose was running, and Aurora flared up claiming it was just some stupid allergy. Then she asked what he meant by fake, and the Duke explained it was a fake birthday, just a show put on for the high and mighty crowd. Audrey asked, "So when is your real birthday then?" And the man said he honestly didn't know, but it sure as hell wasn't today and she shouldn't sweat it. Jeffrey asked if celebrating it was really that big a deal to her, and the pink-haired girl blushed, saying, "Yeah, 'cause you're my fiancé." The Duke asked if he could ask his bride for a gift instead, and she, all confused, just said okay. The fair-haired man thanked her for the green light and his whole vibe. Blushing so hard she looked like she might actually combust, the girl clutched the skirt of her dress, looked down, and gave him her answer. Even though she was down for it, she tried to play it off like a peck on the cheek was nothing, and that was that. But Jeffrey, hell no, he wasn't about to waste a second and made his move. He chucked the flowers behind his back to get him out of the way and leaned in, smirking at his girl. Aurora's heart damn near jumped out of her chest the second Jeffy's warm lips touched. Blonde chick back at her crib was creeping downstairs holding a little candlestick. She was thinking how hyped she was that her dress was ready on time, and she also had the necklace pretty much ready to pull the whole look together. The girl figured it'd be perfect if Duke Eteka was her date, and was thinking to herself how she just didn't get why her dad had such a beef with the guy. Negotiator. Taking a gulp of wine, her dad declared that this nobody had no idea who he was messing with, or how deep this whole thing runs. The blue-eyed girl just kept her mouth shut, looking pissed off as she heard her dad trash-talk Jeffrey, calling him some ambitious scrub. The girl threw out there that maybe his fiancé, the one who's now the prince's escort, was the one pulling all the strings. The blonde clapped back that if a chick from Aurora's family had the balls to get engaged to a duke, then she was totally capable of a move like that. She added that on top of all that there were her lady's hair said that one side was all tangled up again and put the comb down. Aurora complained that everyone was being so extra, but Angela was like, "Relax, we're gonna make the future Duchess totally stand out in a room full of dimes." The maid mentioned that just her neck was left and asked if they could use the new gift from the Duke. After getting the green light and putting the moonstone piece in the maid's hands, Aurora told her to stash it somewhere safe so it wouldn't get jacked up. A little later, she was flying down the stairs, gripping the railing with her hands in white lace gloves and calling out for Jeffrey. Aurora, rocking a killer white dress with fancy lace and yellow gems, said sorry for taking so long. The pink-haired chick saw her man all ready to roll, said he was grateful she picked out the suit, and Aurora thought he was checking her out like he was really feeling her dress. Just when she was thinking he looked even finer up close, the blonde dude smiled and was like, "You look amazing." Linking her arm through his, the pink-haired girl said it was all thanks to him for hooking her up with such an awesome gift, and then she thanked the groom. Prince John was already waiting by the ride, totally completing the trio's vibe with his fly outfit and long yellow cloak. Aurora said with a smile that the brown-haired. At the entrance, the herald shouted out to everyone announcing Prince John of Joker, Duke of Eteka, and his girl, Miss Audrey. The girl was thinking, damn, it's just a ball, but she was checking out how they wouldn't even dare. He snagged a glass of wine for his girl from a waiter's tray, and the blonde dude noted that everyone was way too scared of him. She couldn't joke here, they know the Duke's rep. Audrey was like, "What are you guys even talking about?" The brown-haired dude looked at his boy asking, "You really gonna keep your girl in the dark about this?" Negotiator. John replied, "Given the Duke's experience dealing with different peoples, he's the best guy for the job." Aurora took a sip of her wine to hide that she was pissed. The dude just snorted, all nasty-like, and said Edict doesn't know jack about moving in these high-class circles. Still sipping her wine, Aurora couldn't get why anyone cared about this petty drama when all of Emperor and his wife, Empress Enberg, were rolling in. The pink-haired girl couldn't help but think she'd never seen the Empress before, but this woman, unlike her husband, looked totally normal. Audrey whispered to her future husband, "Looks like the prince and princess totally bailed on the party." The blonde guy just muttered, "They're just kids." The Emperor with a raised around in the dance. The man said anyone else could say that, but not you, and she confirmed, "True, I am killing it." Looking at the girl who was a total smoke show that evening, Jeffrey said softly, "Can't even argue with that." When the music stopped, the man leaned over, took his girl's hand, kissed it, and thanked her for the dance. Called her by name. And she looked up, not really getting what was up with the sudden silence and soft look in his eyes. Taking her hands, the man asked, "Hey, you think you could call me by my name at?" He felt his whole soul light up with this warm feeling like butterflies going crazy inside. As they started to dance, the girl couldn't help thinking that the prince was always super nice, but he treated her even better than everyone else. Audrey blushed a little, thinking it was wild that she could just call the prince of another country by his first name. John asked. Since the girl was getting a reward for his good performance, she asked how he knew. The prince shot back that he just had good intuition, and then asked her to be careful anyway because it wasn't over yet. Taken care of. And the brunette asked with a confused look what she was talking about. The blonde replied that everyone would definitely find out soon enough, and Aurora wondered if this lady was. Duchess froze her eyes wide as the woman started yelling. Was this seriously the thanks she got from the beggar? The pink-haired girl never would have guessed that she'd started whispering. Unable to even get a word out, Audrey wondered if she was in some kind of drama or a soap opera, and why this was even happening. The Baroness screamed that the girl had dared to in his hands, and gently stroked her cheek, which was already red from the hit. The blonde man looked like he was back on a battlefield about to face his enemies as he turned to family. Eteka asked if they were really telling the truth. Then how could a mere commoner threaten a whole noble family? The man tried to explain, but the Duke cut him off, saying that he had into backing up her story about where she came from. The pink-haired girl thought in a panic that the woman had spilled everything as Jeffrey pulled her even closer and spoke harshly to the asked if Rudland could even handle the fallout if he handed her over. Knowing he had all the leverage, the blonde dude declared that if he lost his girl, he'd straight up ditch. And the number one reason why regular folks shouldn't get titles. Hearing all that trash talk, the pink-haired girl pulled back from her future husband, ready to throw down with this Duke. Aurora and the soon-to-be-married couple just stared at him all tense. All their haters were grinning, hearing that Duke Rudland had a point, and if they pinned her for dissing the nobility, the girl would be. The pink-haired girl gave the Emperor some serious side-eye, thinking, "This dude really wants to get into this right now." Jeffrey stepped up to His Majesty first, saying that they couldn't be 100% sure his bride wasn't from a noble family. Eteka explained that she lost her memory when she was with Audrey's family, so they couldn't say if her story was legit or not. Girl's background. The Emperor jumped in again, asking Duke Eteka if he seriously didn't do a background check on his own fiancée before popping the question. Jeffrey turned back, basically fighting off. Had to count for something. Even Jeffrey went quiet, not about to get in the way of this save. Looking at the prince's face, which was looking serious for like the first time ever, Aurora thought, damn, I really didn't expect him to have my back. The Emperor sighed and said they could table this whole thing for later since their esteemed guest. Bougie types were so disrespectful to him, and the blonde dude actually blushed a little that she was worried about him. The girl added that for people so obsessed with class, they sure didn't act like they had any. Acting all high and mighty. She was like, "How are you so chill when I'm pissed?" And the dude just said it wasn't the first time and stroked her cheek. Jeffrey told her she was a way bigger deal. Swore she'd wear it all the time, even as a bracelet. Jeffrey gently calmed her down and said he didn't want to make her upset, adding that it was time for his bride-to-be to get some rest. The blonde dude gently touched the bruise on her cheek, using his powers to cool it down and kill the pain. The next day, she's staring at a pile of letters on the table, wondering what they are, and marry Jeffrey. The girl asked if all this really came in just today, and the guy replied that it was all the nobles trying to hook up their daughters. Aurora said she didn't know what to say, and if she knew what was up, he'd already know. Jeffrey shot back that he couldn't let her lie slide anymore, and the girl asked what solution he had in mind. The pink-haired girl blushed like crazy, and her eyes went wide when the dude told her they needed to get married. Leaning forward on the couch, against the Emperor, but he knew she wouldn't be down for that. Aurora mumbled something, and the guy asked if maybe she just didn't want to marry him. The pink-haired girl said that for her marriage had to be about real love, and actually mean something, kinda hinting that she was starting to catch feelings. Jeffrey wondered if that was too much to ask, since survival was kinda the priority here. The girl nervously said that worst case, she'd have to get married, and John muttered that she didn't sound too thrilled about it. Letting out an unhappy sigh, the pink-haired girl just came out and said, "On the saucer." The prince casually mentioned that back in Joker, nobody gives a crap about a person's status. He added that there were even times in their history when kings married regular girls, and the pink-haired girl asked if he was for real. The brunette suggested she move in with him, saying he'd even go against the Emperor to help her if she wanted it. Aurora waved her hands and rushed to say she didn't want to be a burden, but John said saving her was no burden at all. Aurora blushed hard when the dude told her that if she needed his help, he was always there for her. She softly thanked His Highness, and the brown-haired dude took another sip of his drink, declaring that he wasn't doing this for thanks. Yesterday. She bowed and said she was glad she could bring His Majesty some joy, even though she was totally faking it. But then the man suddenly said he had news. The monarch explained that, just like the girl wanted Count Barbarius was going to be punished, and then asked if she was happy about that. Aurora asked if that was for real. The Emperor replied that even Prince Guira had stuck his neck out for the girl. The Emperor asked the girl if she even got how the country's laws worked, explaining that he couldn't just go against him. The pink-haired girl bowed, but all she was thinking was that if she wanted real justice, she had to dig up even more proof. She thought of Phrenesis instantly planning to hit him and her fiancé up about maybe testifying in front of the emperor. The girl said she'd get right on it, but their chat was suddenly cut short by a knock on the door, and then the maid apologized for interrupting. When she heard that Audrey's family and Lady Rubiana had rolled up to the palace. Later the Baroness was like, "You really gonna make us just stand here any longer? With guests who weren't even invited?" Sir Campbell asked why they were there, and the woman shot back that it was none of his business, and that Aurora needed to quit acting like she ran the place. And the Baroness freaked when she saw a knife flash at her side. Rubiana suddenly waved her hands, telling him not to fight, and held up the scroll in her hands like it was some magic fix for everything. The Duke's daughter asked if she was just gonna kick the others out. Turning around, Aurora held her dress and announced she'd let him in today, but they better not think they got lucky. Sweatin' bullets, the young guy said that while the investigation on Aurora's case was still going, Audrey's real daughter, Julia, had to live at the estate. The man said that was just stupid. And the kid nodded a couple times, saying there was a carriage waiting outside, and asked if he was heading over, grabbing a small box from his inner vest pocket, and said he didn't know they were expecting company. Jeffrey demanded to know what was going on, and Ruby rushed up to him, apologized, and said that dude straight up hadn't had time to prep. The Duke of Rudden's daughter was so thirsty for the guy running her mouth so fast it was low-key starting to get on my nerves. He wasn't marrying anyone, period. Looking back at his future wife, the guy asked for her answer, and that crazy expensive ring started sparkling in the box again. Aurora was stressed out by the visit from these extra people and was freaking out about what was happening because it was legally sketchy for both of them. A little later, the girl figured that with this whole scenario, she faced the Duke, asked why she was so sad. She said it was nothing, but Jeffrey shook his head and said, "Nah, you're not okay at all." Aurora asked if he was. Duchess mumbled that she actually had a question she was curious about. Looking down, the pink-haired girl could feel her ears and cheeks burning up. She asked if he actually liked her or not. Jeffrey was totally stunned when he heard that, and just stared at her with eyes wider than she'd ever seen. He ran a hand through his hair and said there was no way she was the real Jeffrey, and he'd probably shoot her down, but she just had to take a shot. The pink-haired girl apologized and said he was just playing his part so well that for a sec, she actually believed him. Not knowing what else to say after she basically confessed, he just coolly thanked her for the compliment. His bride, still not looking up, said that she looked up and said it was nothing that would mess with their deal, so he had no reason to stress. Eteka just listened, standing there like he was carved from stone. When she mumbled that she hoped he wouldn't catch feelings, she added that it would be super awkward if he actually fell for her because in the end the dude promised. She said you can't just treat people like that, adding that if Jeffrey were here he would have handled it, but the talks hit a wall and he had to bounce for a bit. Snapping out of it, she immediately thought kinda pissed that the dude was barely ever home these days anyway. The pink-haired girl was yanked out of her thoughts when she heard her name. The girl looked down and mumbled what she'd just found out, immediately asking for forgiveness for not having her back. Crossing her arms, the pink-haired girl said that if the girl wanted them to be like sisters, she needed to spit out what she really wanted first. Julia nodded and sighed, then quietly mumbled that she just wanted to get something off her chest. Her mistress was totally floored when she heard that Audrey never wanted to marry the Duke. The redhead added that she'd been sickly since she was a kid and had dodged death so many times. It was no joke to say she was legit sick. She said there was so much more she wanted to do with her life, but she just never got the chance to do it. Just to become some pawn in someone else's shady political games. The future Duchess asked what she meant because her mom and Lady Rubiana were still around trying to mess up her life so they could get ahead. The other girl mumbled that Lady Rubiana was going to be the real headache because of her status, but they could probably try to keep her mom out of the picture. Then the girl promised she would stay out of other people's business, and even if she was left one-on-one with the Duke, it was no big deal. The pink-haired girl couldn't shake the feeling that this chick seemed way too chill. Of the Audrey family dropped a bombshell saying that since she was a little kid, her dream was to become a badass knight. She added that if she could just get strong enough to ride a horse and swing a sword, she'd start protecting people. Aurora, in total shock, said that was an awesome dream, and even though she wasn't 100% sold on the girl, she wished her luck. This whole conversation was getting pretty pointless. After she'd already started walking away, the red-haired lady bowed and said sorry again on behalf of the entire Audrey family. Shot back that he was just there to talk shop and wasn't trying to get in the middle of Eteka and his girl. The sun was blasting through the window and G was like, "Appreciate the help." The Duke's assist is how they managed to find those refugees near Jokir. He added that if the Emperor caught wind of this, he'd use them as human shields, and Jeffrey just asked. Just asked, so what? Jean explained that if Joker became their last stand, there was still hope for the Empire, and Jeffrey called that a pretty optimistic take. The green-eyed dude let out a sigh and shook his head, then said he didn't want to live with any regrets, and that's why he was shooting his shot. The Duke stayed quiet when he heard him say. Jeffrey told him to get to the point, and the prince proposed making Gear the final stronghold and trying to make a deal with the other races. The Duke said that if he were in their shoes, also figure out the whole negotiation thing. After laying all that out, the fair-haired man turned and said it was time for him to bounce, but the prince shot up from his seat and called. Because of that, she might even have to lay low in Geosir. Ripping his glasses off, the blonde turned to Jean and said that just because he'd been quiet didn't mean it was cool to cross the line. Taking a step back, the dude added that he follows the Emperor's orders not 'cause he has to, but 'cause he can, stopping just inches from his potential rival's face. Eteka warned him to listen up. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, the girls were staring totally shocked at the future Duchess, who asked them to take some gifts from her lady. Rubiana, also holding a box, was looking super suspicious and asked what the deal was. Crossing her arms, Aurora sighed and said it would be pretty dumb of her to forget. The pink-haired girl quietly listened to the whole rant about how the Duke hadn't even bothered to say what's up to his fiancée, which meant the whole thing was fake. The woman screamed that they just stared at her stunned while Julia kept her cool. The girl explained that even though her daughter was staying there, this isn't some coffee shop you could just pop into. Girl asked if that was his excuse for going silent. Eteka replied that it just slipped his mind, and he didn't want to bum her out, but Aurora couldn't tell if he actually felt bad after their fight. Her supposed husband, the pink-haired girl, thought to herself that he was faking it again. They had this whole silent conversation with tiny, barely there movements of their lips, or the chatter, the rustle of dresses, and the click-clack of heels on the floor finally faded out, leaving them alone. The pink-haired girl couldn't help but think how awkward everyone felt. The blonde dude was clearly thrown off by her cold shoulder, so he told her she didn't have to get used to it, and that from now on he'd treat her better. With her arms crossed over her, said that was a relief. The pink-haired girl gave her fiancé a surprised look when he asked if she'd eaten, and then invited her to grab dinner together. A few weeks later, all of Adele, they should head back, but the pink-haired girl answered that she had no intention of hiding. Aurora froze, and Sir Campbell and Julia spun around when they heard the strangers ask if they were right in, thinking that she was the Duke's fiancée. One of the crew, obviously the leader, a blonde dude in a green tailcoat, stepped ahead of the others and asked if the girl's name came from. Aurora asked why they thought she had to answer their questions, and the guy mumbled that in high society, it's customary to give your name. Raising an eyebrow, the girl asked if they had introduced themselves, and then followed up by asking if grilling someone like this was so noble. Like she was schooling some clueless puppies, she declared that they should definitely be ashamed of themselves, and the young men totally blushed with shame. Shaking her head, annoyed, the pink-haired girl said in a super dramatic tone that this was the future of definitely following them. The maid asked if they were being lured in. Hearing a yes, the future Duchess muttered that if these clowns who pissed her off followed them into that dark alley, they were gonna get what's coming to them. The blonde dude shouted again that they wouldn't let an insult to the nobility slide and that they were just waiting for a humble apology. Aurora thought, bored out of her mind, about how predictable they were, then crossed her arms and asked what would happen otherwise. Pointing his index finger at them, the blonde stranger declared that if they didn't get an apology, the maid was next. Angela muttered sarcastically that she was so scared, and the pink-haired girl noticed the jerks were threatening her favorite maid, clenching. Whispering about this, the nobleman ordered them to knock it off, and tried to swing at the girl but got caught. The blonde stranger wheezed loudly, but didn't even have time to scream when he felt away, but none of them wanted to be her punching bag. As soon as the leader managed to get up and limp after them, all three of them booked it once they got a taste of this girl's wrath. Just be crazy, and her escort asked if he needed to handle it. Later, the girl asked if this guy had heard the rumors that she was getting engaged just to get back at the nobles, by getting their approval. The dark-haired dude said that the local kids really liked her and would be super happy to meet her, and the future Duchess was surprised to hear that. He wondered why Duke had been looking out for them, the regular folks, for a long time. The girl asked if they got any help from the nobles, and the young guy hesitated, kind of scratching the back of his head. The guy replied that they were helping, 'cause even that little bit of help was better than nothing, and the girl frowned. The pink-haired girl remembered with confusion how all the noblewomen, Johnny said that this was the Miss Aurora, and the little girl said excitedly that she looked like a princess. The blonde boy argued that the lady looked like a fairy, and the dark-haired guy looked scared and quickly waved his hands, explaining it was just Miss Aurora, and Pepper asked if she was Ed's wife. The woman then asked the young man, grimly, if he really believed those rumors going around everywhere and brought her here, and Johnny didn't know what to say. Pepper's freckled face looked confused and annoyed when she heard that the should answer. The girl asked why they didn't like the charity work from the noble ladies, explaining that the Duke was also planning a charity project, and she was gathering info. The redhead would be better if they just stayed away, and she didn't trust Duke Eteka. The pink-haired girl stayed quiet when she heard he was making money off poor people and also always watching them to keep them under control. Johnny wiped away some nervous sweat as the woman said they didn't need pity or their pathetic handouts, and they weren't, so added that she was a really cool magician, asking if she'd shown her any magic. The pink-haired girl asked in surprise what she meant by magic, and Pepper just shook her head, face-palming and sighing loudly. The woman explained that a lot of the people here like her were born with a little bit of mana, but it didn't matter. Pepper added that to use this magic you have to study it and also learn a special ancient language, math, and other sciences. Aurora thought that in the coming war, every mage would be crucial, and asked if nobody knew about her magical power. Just straight up ignored by the rich and powerful. As she said her goodbyes to the kids, Aurora realized she'd never really gotten how big the class gap was since she'd only ever known, saying it was just the same design, and the pink-haired girl asked where she copped a fit like that. She added that it was a total pain to always be ordering custom dresses and this chick was getting on her nerves. The pink-haired girl straight up said it was time for her to bounce too, since the future Duchess was about to dip again. She froze when Ruby screamed that she couldn't. I gotta go deal with some lady business, you know. And Rubiana looked shook. The Duke's daughter awkwardly mumbled that she should have said something sooner, but the future Duchess just blew her off saying she wasn't seeing her out. A little later, the girl was already in bed, curled up in a ball, wondering why the cramps were hitting so damn hard, feeling the cold sweat on her face. The pink-haired girl figured, okay, that explains why I totally lost it on Jeffrey. There was a knock, and then the dude told his fiancée every month, but she wasn't usually in this much pain. The pink-haired girl started to kind of dig his touch, but then she got super red and quietly asked him to wait up. Jeffrey thought his touch had just made things worse and pulled his hand back, but Aurora whispered for him to leave it there. The Duke gently ran his fingers over his fiancée's forehead again, and she started to chill out a little. Her spot and grabbed her fiancé by the wrist, letting out a big sigh and telling him to get over here. She mumbled a sorry, and basically dragged him onto the bed, wrapping her arms, stood up and asked him to spread his legs, declaring that it wasn't enough. And the Duke was literally dumbfounded when the gist of the request finally dawned on Eteka and he spread his knees. The pink-haired girl raised her head, showing her flushed cheeks, and asked him to make peace. The Duke asked her if she agreed to this, and the girl answered with a bright yes. She felt so good that the pain had receded. Aurora asked if she could come for his touch when their contract was up, but only as long as he was single. Eteka, who was simply melting from such almost cat-like behavior of the girl, was silent for quite a long time, and then with a smile snuggling closer to his chest, the pink-haired girl whispered that it was just perfect, then closed her eyes and thanked him. A little later, when the room was completely dark, Aurora moaned, realizing that she was lying on his arm, and they both fell asleep like that. It seemed that Jeffrey was not in the most comfortable position, but he still slept very soundly, immediately hugging the girl with his other arm. The girl quickly moved her palms away from her fiancé and asked for forgiveness, but he only hugged her tighter and asked what she was apologizing for. Aurora whispered sheepishly that she had touched him without permission, although she had no secret intentions and was simply admiring him. Holding his bride to his chest, the man muttered that she could use his body as she wished, and she asked if he talked in his sleep. The pink-haired girl asked what would happen if she asked for something strange, and the blonde one asked what it could be. She muttered that she could ask him to chop 1,000 pieces of wood with his own hands, and the blonde man whispered with a smile that she was a liar, allowing the girl to move away after a little resistance. The Duke gently objected and stated that she was thinking of something completely different. After chatting for a bit, they sat down on the bed, and answering her fiancé's question, Aurora explained that she felt this way when she was tired or nervous. Jeffrey listened to his bride and muttered that everything that happened in that case was his fault and asked for forgiveness. Eteka said he doesn't mistake the desire to ease someone's pain for a burden, adding that the girl's health is more important than the meeting. The pink-haired girl asked if he should focus on negotiations these days, and the Duke assured her that he would do as he wished. Putting her hand to her chest, Aurora looked at her fiancé and quietly asked if it was possible that in that case. The bride said that today she was followed by 3 unknown guys, and the security guard wrote down their names in order to check everything later. It seemed that the blonde man's mood. The Duke said he could stick around with her until the pain passed like she did, but Aurora replied that the worst was over, and he didn't need to try so hard. Jeffrey asked, confused, if his fiancé wanted him there. Doesn't mistake the desire to ease someone's pain for a burden, adding that the girl's health is more important than the meeting. The pink-haired girl asked if he should focus on negotiations. Aurora, who was worried about Jeffrey, smiled happily, even blushing a bit in anticipation, and agreed with his words, nodding several times in agreement. The fair-haired guy said that in that case, he would let his bride be his personal secretary. Eteka noted that all this would only be possible if she put on the ring, and the pink-haired girl looked at him in surprise. Rumors, and then said that she had visited Adele, and that rumors of an engagement hadn't started yet. Aurora asked with a smile if this would be the perfect chance to plant rumors, flipped a switch. He got all serious and thoughtful, agreeing to it right then and there. The next day, the soon-to-be-married couple met up with Prince John at the Imperial Palace, and they exchanged. And when the prince asked what the Duke was thinking bringing the girl here, he shot back that she was going to be his secretary. Eteka gave him a dirty look, turned to His Majesty and asked what he was thinking just calling his bride by her first name like that. John claimed the lady gave him permission, but the pink-haired girl was pissed, thinking about how she only gave him the okay for just one time. The blonde dude hugged his bride and said they should sit down first, because the girl wasn't feeling great today, and the prince offered her a seat, tossing the documents on the table. The blonde dude immediately and calmly replied that they didn't have any good candidates, and Aurora looked over at him. The girl immediately snatched up the papers too, of the Eteka Guild, and the marriage was just supposed to be a cover. The pink-haired girl looked up and thought, so this is what they're working on, because since what he said about how nobody in the kingdom gave a damn about status. When she asked about it, Cheon replied that there were no restrictions because his crew had both guys and girls, and they were staying in the Empire until the summer ball and would wait for an answer until then. The Duke folded his hands and calmly added that they'd try to find a suitable candidate for the mission by then. Later, in a wide hallway, someone stopped Duke Eteka while he was walking with his bride, who was holding onto his arm. The girl realized it was the Emperor's butler when the man said His Majesty had a little prize for the Duke. Jeffrey let out a huge sigh because he obviously didn't like where this was going and asked what this surprise was all about. The butler said that since Lady Julia deserved a chance, he'd take his lordship to the meeting spot. Meeting. Clasping her hands, the pink-haired girl calmly told him he should go, and the man stroked Aurora's back. Looking at her, Jeffrey stayed quiet when he heard you can't go against the Emperor's orders, and she declared she wasn't worried about him and Julia at all. The blonde dude mumbled that she didn't have to do that, but the girl said she was fine and they'd been together all day anyway. Gently tugging his strong hand with her own, the pink-haired girl said with a smile that on top of everything else she trusted her. The future Duchess stepped out of the carriage and saw another woman in front of her. Thinking she didn't recognize her, the girl stopped short when a happy Phrenesis dressed like a noble suddenly hopped out of the carriage. As the elf walked up to her and gently kissed the back of her hand, the pink-haired girl noted that he'd learned his manners well. That he'd worked hard for his lady's pride, and she even clapped at how much his writing had improved. The future Duchess asked if he wanted to come inside and rest for a bit after the pink-haired girl said it wouldn't do him any good, because it was still way too risky to show the elf to anyone. Spotting her uninvited guest, Aurora said that Julia wasn't around, and then asked why the Duke's little fangirl had come. The blonde turned around and said that the Duke's bride, even if she was a commoner, should know that's no way to greet a guest. The future Duchess said she did. Friends date, so she came to keep an eye on things. The pink-haired girl asked if she was talking about herself, and when she got pissed, she asked if Lady Rutland wasn't the one totally blinded by jealousy. Leaning in, the blonde snapped that she'd been trying to play nice since she was the Duke's bride, but she had crossed a line. Aurora stroked her chin, wondering how a girl could even survive in the cutthroat world of the nobility if she got triggered by every little thing. Ruby screamed that she wouldn't dare, but the pink-haired girl suggested that she just tell Jeffrey about her feelings, instead of using Julia to break them up. Turning beet red when she realized her plan was exposed, Rubiana yelled that she wasn't trying to do that at all, and was just trying to help her poor friend. The future Duchess pointed out that she was talking to the one and only Rubiana Rutland, who's always spreading fake rumors. Aurora calmly said that she knew that the girl was pulling all this crap just to stop Jeffrey's wedding from happening. When Ruby asked what she meant by that, the Duke's fiancé replied that everyone knew Ika was obsessed with her. Aurora added that the girl might even be hoping to become the Duke's side piece one day, and she shrieked that she was wrong. The Duke's daughter couldn't seem to think of a single excuse for why she was doing all this and just mumbled. The pink-haired girl stated that in that case she needed to put her money where her mouth is and prove it. She pointed her finger at the door and declared that Ruby should get out tired of putting up with rude visits from unwanted guests. A little later, the Duke's daughter did leave. The girl was sitting in her carriage, which was heading to the Imperial Palace. The blonde looked down, choking back tears, replaying Aurora's harsh truths in her head over and over. Blushing with shame, Rubiana muttered that she would never be a side piece, and that girl had no right to throw such insults. Looking out the window, Lady Rutland suddenly spotted a familiar figure there, immediately yelling and demanding that the carriage be stopped. Ruby called Julia's name as she hurried out of the ride, and Audrey turned to face her, holding up the hem of her dress. She asked what the girl was doing there and where the Duke was, and the red-haired girl calmly replied that he went home. Home, the blonde asked why everything happened so quickly, and her friend replied with a sigh that they just had nothing to talk about. Rubiana asked again if Audrey had done what she told her to, and then reminded her that she looked much prettier when she smiled. Cutting off the endless nagging, the red-haired woman interrupted her and asked if she was supposed to be her puppet. Rutland flushed with shame, and the girl said she'd been given a lot of opportunities she was grateful for. Julia replied that it was thanks to her that her family was able to move to the capital and meet the Duke himself. But there was one thing Audrey stated, that she couldn't follow her orders anymore, explaining that she just wasn't that kind of person. The girl added that she was sick of pretending to be someone she wasn't, because even in these fancy outfits, she was still just a simple girl from the outskirts. Nodding at their reflection in a window, the red-haired woman stated that Lady Rubiana was trying to turn her into a carbon copy of herself. The blonde blushed when she heard from the girl that she couldn't become like Rutland, and didn't even want to try. She quietly but firmly told her to stop, and Ruby felt a real desperation as she tried to change Audrey's mind, but she was totally tongue-tied. Rubiana said she was just trying to free Duke Edict from Aurora so that the worthy Julia could be by his side instead. Standing opposite the lady who was trying to lay out the real picture, the blonde wondered if she had always been such an empty shell. While she was having a crisis and rethinking her whole life, Julia turned to Duke Jeffrey, who was standing outside the window. A few hours ago, the man said he heard Audrey apologize to Aurora, and the girl muttered that they were being spied on. The Duke stated that his fiancée might have bought it, but he sure as hell wasn't going to trust simple words after all the crap she'd pulled. The man asked if she'd be willing to prove her honesty to earn his trust, and Julia asked what he was talking about. Crossing his arms, the blonde-haired man declared that if the girl agreed to marry whoever he chose for her, she would be forgiven. For good. Jeffrey added that she knew Aurora had been through hell because of Audrey's family, and she just asked who she had to marry. The Duke stated that all she needed to know was that this dude was from Gear, and he broke it down for her. If she was on board, she'd have to ghost Audrey's entire family. And if she wasn't well, things were gonna get real ugly. The redhead looked up and clapped back, asking if that was a threat. She was just processing how now that she knew the Duke and Gear were connected, her life was pretty much in his hands. After thinking it over for a second, Julia caved and said she was down. The dude was like, smart move. Leaning in, Jeffrey told her she had to really sell it to make him believe she was all in. Audrey asked how. The blonde dude told her to get Lady Rubiana Rudland off Aurora's back, cause he was done letting her mess with his chick. Jeffrey bounced only after he saw for himself that the girl actually pulled it off. A bit later, Wendell asked if Julia had killed his lordship's vibe, but he was like, nah, not at all. He just stayed quite still, replaying Audrey's reaction when he told her to make Rubiana back off his fiancé for good. Then the guy totally froze when he heard her say that she was actually glad the Duke was for real in love with Aurora, and that it was super obvious, which made him think she knew he definitely wasn't into her. The blonde then asked his assistant where his bride was at. When he heard she was in the tea room at Phrenesis's place, Jeffrey whipped around like, wait, the elf is actually here right now. And the dude confirmed he'd rolled up to the estate earlier today. The girl grumbled that he could have just sent a letter, then knocked and opened the door, running smack into her fiancé. Later over dessert, Aurora asked how his date with Julia went, and immediately grilled him on where they went. The blonde dude was like, whoa, it wasn't a date, and said Prince Jean just recommended the spot. Audrey shot back asking how he knew the perfect place. The girl mumbled something about Julia just barely being legal, and the Duke was like, so what do you think we were doing all evening? The pink-haired girl shot up and told him to watch his mouth. She covered Phrenesis's ears, explaining they had an innocent in the room. The Duke just sighed and asked his bride if she had any clue how long elves actually live. She just gave him a confused look. Jeffrey told the old-timer not to be shy and just drop his age. The elf just scribbled on a piece of paper that it was basically the same for him. The blonde whispered that he was just acting his age and taking real good care of her, and that Phrenesis was just playing her so she'd baby him. Leaning on the table, the Duke declared he owned this joint and could kick the elf out in a hot second. The pink-haired girl, totally confused, asked what they were whispering about. Then she turned to her guest, asking if he was okay, as Phrenesis leaned on her shoulder. Aurora asked if her fiancé had hit him with some magic, but Jeffrey was like, I wouldn't even need to. She said she wanted to talk about something else anyway, and asked if His Majesty remembered she'd recently met up with the Emperor. She got the go-ahead from her fiancé and said that during that meeting the conversation turned to what was going to happen with the Count, Viscount Barbarous. The pink-haired girl explained that if they wanted to nail him for all the messed up crap he's done, Phrenesis would have to testify in person. Aurora said she wanted to get the elf's take on the whole thing and asked the fiancé if he should show his face to the Emperor. The elf wrote down that he'd do it so the guy would have to pay for his crimes. The Duke straight up said he could just take the Viscount out to make things quick. Phrenesis wrote back that death was too easy, that the guy needed to suffer first. Aurora noted his vocabulary was pretty dark and twisted. The girl asked her fiancé if Phrenesis should go through with it, and the blonde dude said yeah, but only if Roland Barbarous breaks the connection first. The Duke was quick to warn that if he didn't, the Emperor would just use Roland to get to the other elves. The pink-haired girl leaned in, asking how you break that kind of chain between an elf and their master. Jeffrey said you basically have to reverse the whole slavery ritual. The dude said that the process involves drinking fairy tears, then their blood, all while the elf is screaming bloody murder. Then the owner has to smear that blood on their own neck and wash it off with the tears. Aurora just listened, with her eyes wide open, horrified by the gnarly stuff Barbarous must have done to those creatures to chain them to him. She suggested they break the bond on the down low, so that when the slave bond is presented as evidence, nobody else could try and pull something. Nodding, the Duke asked if they had any other proof besides the super risky kind. His bride immediately started thinking about it, then gave her fiancé a wink and told him not to even sweat it. Crossing her arms, she turned her head and reminded them they had the one and only Phrenesis on their team. And the elf just pointed at himself like, who me, totally clueless. That same night, Roland was stumbling through the dark halls, wine sloshing from a glass he'd been nursing, all torn up that he'd become a Viscount. Even though he was pretty out of it, the dude turned to the huge window when a flash of green caught his eye. He totally freaked when he saw Phrenesis right there. Might put up. After they were done and had gagged the blonde dude with a rag, the guy asked if keeping him quiet was good enough, and then asked which one of them was going to make him break. The future head of the Eteka family messed up that he was the judge, and what would happen if he was the one who committed a crime. The pink-haired girl asked her fiancé if he agreed it was pretty weird, and Jeffrey urged his bride-to-be to be more careful. Just then, a dude in a slick dark purple robe stood up and announced that the trial of Viscount Barbarous would now begin. He also read out that this man was his duties as a lord. While the trial was dragging on, Aurora couldn't help but yawn, covering her mouth and thinking to herself that this was all just a rerun for her. Looks like those words, even though she said them like a joke, didn't sit right with the guy, who immediately scowled a bit and went quiet, shutting down the conversation. By then, the arguments from both sides in court was supposed to be the main event. The pink-haired girl smirked when she heard the former count confess to every single charge. The emperor, like most of the nobles present, looked at that former count completely shocked and confused. The ducal Ika family wasn't surprised, though, because just a little while ago, the pink-haired girl had come up with mentioned crimes during the entire time he was his slave. At the same time, the girl was impressed by how well he spoke and how fast he was growing up, wondering how that bitch ever tried to silence her sweet boy. The Viscount's property be seized, adding that he wanted the man to just disappear. Aurora quietly asked her fiancé why the sentence was so heavy, since she expected him to be locked up for. Congrats on the trial being over. Once they were out on the street, Aurora called out to Thesis, and he suddenly jumped on the future Duchess, giving her a huge hug when she froze up the elf. Thanked the girl for what she did, cause if it wasn't for her, he'd still be a slave getting clowned on by everyone. As Jeffrey came up on them, the pink-haired girl awkwardly told him not to sweat it, cause that messed up past was never gonna happen again. Breaking up the hug, Ika shoved the girl behind him and asked the elf who the hell he thought he was, hugging his girl without permission. Aurora told her man to chill. So much all the time. Their chat got cut short when some court official yelled for Duke Ek to hold up and ran over to them. After apologizing, the dark-haired dude put a hand on his chest and said he didn't mean to butt in, and the guy turned around saying, "What's up?" to Count Hurt. Squaring his shoulders, Jeffrey turned to him and asked what was up. The dude said that today they were moving past the basics, and when the pink-haired girl asked what they were going to do, he told the girls to copy him. Looking ahead, Aurora wondered if this wasn't a little too advanced for them, since they'd only been practicing for a couple days. Campbell expertly handled a sharp long sword, gripping the hilt of the weapon to do a similar move, even if it wasn't perfect. Stepping forward with her sword, the pink-haired girl mumbled that she'd do it, but the two of them better not laugh at her trying. She stopped breathing out. Both of them clapped. The dude mumbled that it was excellent, and Julia said with a smile that it was just delightful. The pink-haired girl kinda mumbled that she wasn't. At totally different levels, it'd be better for him to give Miss Julia private lessons without her lady. Turning to the lady, he told her to keep practicing that move and stance, adding that she could hit him up if she had any questions. As she kept training alone, the pink-haired girl thought to herself that since war was coming, no matter what, this talent would come in handy. She had just thought that she could protect herself when suddenly Prince Jean popped up in front of her, smiling and chill like always. Turning around, Aurora asked him how long he'd been standing there, and the young dude stepped closer. The prince was cool with it and said he didn't mind waiting, and the Duke's bride-to-be nodded, and then bounced so she wouldn't keep him waiting. A little later, Julia spotted the guest. Kinda hesitated, saying it wasn't really like that. The guy with the brown hair was like, damn, that's weird then, cause he and his adopted sis were even into the same stuff, like all that chivalry junk. That it totally made sense, and besides all that, she really did look just like Aurora. Jean said he was trying to do whatever it took to help Miss Aurora, feeling pretty sure that Audrey wanted. Stepping closer, the prince asked if he could ask a favor, cause he was worried the Duke couldn't actually protect her from the Emperor. The brunette immediately shot back, asking if the random fights they still cared about each other. The redhead nodded when the prince asked again if they were arguing, and he seemed even a little more interested now, nodding a few times. Then the brown-haired dude thanked the girl for the intel. He turned to leave, but stopped after a couple steps and asked Julia if she could please not tell Miss Aurora about lot more trouble. When the brown-haired dude pointed off to the side, she followed his gaze and saw these massive piles of gifts, awkwardly mumbling that it was way too much. The prince. Him if he knew it had a kinda sketchy reputation, and the prince shot back that he'd heard rumors, it wasn't actually that bad. After thinking for a sec, the pink-haired girl said she'd the tickets, which he'd actually already ordered since the masquerade was in like 2 days. After telling the girl not to worry about her outfit and accessories for the party, the prince, he was just hoping she'd agree. The prince's sharp eye noticed something, and he asked her with a smile why she wasn't wearing her engagement ring today, and she quickly covered her hand. Aurora said it was just really important, and she was afraid of losing it, and the prince asked if the Duke had officially proposed yet. She said yeah, thinking that this was all proposal. Jean reminded her that he'd already told her Duke Ed wasn't her only choice, and that she didn't have to put up with his status. The man looked at her, and Duke Ika overheard the whole conversation. He remembered how they looked at the ball for the Joker delegation, and couldn't help but think they looked good together. Then he overheard people gossiping about how the prince couldn't stop smiling while dancing with Miss Aurora, and wondering if she was going to bounce to Joker. He remembered asking if she couldn't tell the difference between an act and the real deal. Clenching his fists as he walked away, the blonde dude was annoyed, thinking he'd promised himself to let her go when the time came. The adjutant gave the Duke a surprised look when he was told to forget the visit and get the carriage ready. The confused assistant asked where he was even going. The Duke just said they needed to buy a mask. Meanwhile, Aurora was thinking that she knew Prince Jean was into her, but she definitely didn't expect him to be so blunt about it. After a moment, the pink-haired girl said she wasn't going to leave Jeffrey, and the prince asked why. Her eyes went wide when she heard what he said next. He said that at the end of the day, there was no love between them. Jane said with total confidence that Aika couldn't love anyone, which meant the two of them just had some kind of arrangement. He added that he'd shut up for now so she wouldn't hate him, but if things changed, he'd gladly welcome her with open arms. Then the brown-haired prince got up and headed for the door. Aurora was annoyed, wondering why he'd say Duke Aika couldn't love and act so damn sure about it. Looking at the gifts, she thought she needed to get to the bottom of this, so she'd keep all this stuff a secret from Jeffrey for now. 2 days later, the day of the masquerade arrived. The pink-haired girl kept unpacking the boxes, wondering out loud if he'd really given her so much. Looking at a black necklace, Angela asked what an unusual color it was, and the Duke's fiancé clicked her tongue just saying it's a necklace. Aurora picked up a long black wig and muttered, "I'll take this one." The aristocrats were already mingling, trying to figure out who was who behind the crazy outfits, masks, and wild hairstyles. But Aurora's eyes were a dead giveaway, even with the long black wig and the fancy mask covering half her face. So of course the prince recognized her. Jin told her the hair color really suited her, and that he almost didn't recognize her at first. Meanwhile, the Duke was watching them, his own hair hidden by a red wig, and his face behind a gray mask with rabbit ears, just staring at the flirting prince. The prince commented that this party was way different from the masquerades he was used to. Aurora asked if he'd want to throw parties like this in Jokir, and he said he wasn't sure, but it was definitely progressive. While Aurora stayed quiet to see what would happen, the gray-eyed man pulled her into a hug, declaring that the rules said it didn't matter who they were to each other, they had to split. This random chick almost plowed into her and mumbled a quick sorry. Aurora scanned the crowd, wondering where the hell all these people came from, and realized she'd lost track of Prince Jean. The rabbit dude leaned in and told her not to be so bummed out, adding that at a ball like this, you're supposed to enjoy the unexpected. He said they could just have fun on their own, and she declared that she would never in her life take his hand, so he needed to find somebody else for the night. After walking about 10 steps away, the future Duchess thought it was awesome that the rabbit dude had finally left her alone and then made it her mission to find the prince. Realizing the place was way too packed, Aurora wondered if it'd be better to just wait by. A slick black mask just appeared out of nowhere and asked if he could have this dance. Without missing a beat, Aurora put her hand in his and asked if he knew her, and the blonde guy just smiled and gave a vague answer. Leaning over and gently kissing the back of her gloved hand, he said that black looked damn good on her too. The girl looked away, wondering if he wasn't her type, and the guy coolly said he'd just decide to give up. The girl asked what would happen if the answer was the opposite, and Jeffrey stated that he would asked why her fiancé was even here, and he just answered her question with another question, asking what she thought his reason was. He said with a grin that he was looking for some no-strings-attached love, and his fiancé told him to stop messing around and said this was looking a lot like a breach of contract. The girl reminded him that when they made the deal, they promised not to fall for each other, but now it seemed to her was ready to be her most devoted lapdog. Jeffrey gently brushed his nose against hers, nuzzling her soft skin before smiling at the warmth radiating from her and telling her he loved her. A little while later, the carriage was rolling down the street back to the mansion, while most of the city was already dead asleep. Reaching forward, Aurora carefully grabbed the fancy mask and took it off Jeffrey's face. She looked totally shocked and lost as she whispered that it was really him staring at her fiancé's face and blushing like crazy. The girl asked how he knew she would be there, and the Duke calmly said he'd overheard her talking with Prince Jean. Aurora asked if he was crazy. When she nodded, the Duke shook his head and declared that on the contrary, he was seeing clearer than ever before and pulled out some kind of package. The man handed her a paper bag, telling her to take it, and his bride-to-be took the strange thing, obviously curious. Opening the package, she started pulling out papers and quietly asked what they were. He quietly begged the girl to stay by his side. The man coolly stated that if she wanted a title, land, or money, even if she wanted the whole damn empire, he could give it all to her easy. Aurora realized that he apparently didn't hear her answer to Prince Jean's question about becoming a potential queen of Gear if she left with him, while she was thinking about how Jeffrey also hadn't heard. Into the bag, Aurora said she didn't want any of the riches he was offering, she just wanted him. Jeffrey dropped to one knee right there on the carriage floor, saying he'd do it. Getting a kick out of how much her fiancé wanted her, Aurora said that's not how dogs really bark, and he needed to try harder. When the guy got the joke and frowned a bit, she quickly told him he could pout all he wanted, but a promise is a promise. The guy warned her this was the absolute last time and suddenly started barking like a real dog while his bride-to-be. Angela asked if something good happened, and then looked at her lady and asked if Duke Eteka had confessed. The pink-haired girl just stayed quiet and smiled smugly, and said she was just scared her mistress would marry the wrong guy and be miserable in her marriage for years. She reminded her that if Lady Aurora wanted to stay close to Eteka, the ripped apart. A while later, Jeffrey handed her a piece of paper and told her to read it carefully before signing. She raised her eyebrows in surprise when she saw the getting married. Jeffrey looked her over and then said that even if she didn't like him, she'd have to agree to the marriage just to survive. The blonde guy added that only then would the Emperor leave her alone, and besides, she'd hate a real marriage, and Aurora stayed quiet. Eteka added that he knows he can be a real jerk sometimes, and that he also knows could add whatever she wanted. Surprised, Aurora said she thought he didn't want her to leave, and Jeffrey confirmed he didn't. Never even thought her fiancé could be so caring or devoted to anyone. Eteka was quiet for a second, then laced his fingers together and said he never knew he had it in him either until him to prove he was serious about all his new intentions. The dude got a little worried when he heard he'd have to go through a test, just like the one he put her through at that restaurant. In separate rooms. Jeffrey asked excitedly if that was just for tonight, and the girl muttered mysteriously that she'd think about it. She said she'd let him know when she made up her mind about it, and the blonde just stared at his bride, totally confused and a little in shock. The next morning he asked if she even slept, and she told him not to worry, saying she just had right there in the kitchen to rest. Aurora said if anyone saw him now, they'd totally mistake him for a chef, and Jeffrey said he'd take that as a compliment. After plating all the food, the blonde turned and walked over, saying he hoped his bride would like everything, as he set down a plate of perfectly cooked steak sauce and veggies, cut into the steak. After the first bite, Aurora actually blushed a little, thinking the dish wasn't just good, it was unreal. The girl tried to keep a straight face, each other's families and friends, but today he'd be the only one meeting her people. When her groom asked for clarification, the girl said of course she meant Audrey, but couldn't figure out why the elf was there. But the pink-haired girl shot back that Thesis was practically family. The elf was clearly not happy and looked like he wanted to get. The Duke's bride announced that Angela was up first, and the girl agreed, taking a break from her snacks and washing them down with some tea. The maid asked what kind of bread Miss Aurora hated, and Jeffrey said raisin bread. When asked what color suited his bride, the man said dark gray, pink, navy blue, and lavender. Looking at Eteka's face, Aurora wondered if he was some kind of pro at this too. Stylist, cause she didn't even know this herself. When Angela asked about the dudes who wronged his bride, the man said he'd handle them on the down low, and the girl asked if he was gonna off them behind her back. Muttered that he'd weaseled his way out of that one, then said she was done and it was F's turn. The elf was clearly dead serious, cause he wasn't just trying to grill him to break down what this love meant to him. The blonde dude looked up and asked for a sec to think, and then said he was ready to die for her. The man said that, with a sly look, that he was forbidden from doing certain things until their wedding day. Smiling, Aurora clasped her hands behind her back and said that from here on out, he wasn't allowed to upset her or make. Pink-haired girl said that if the guy couldn't handle it, then once their contract was up, she was out of here. Jeffrey asked if that meant if he pulled it off, the girl would never leave him. Covered his mouth with his hand, surprising the girl with how he was acting. When the bride started getting close, the blonde asked what was up, and Aurora said that she wanted so in love with Aurora that even a light kiss could turn into something way more intense. Gently stroking her shiny pink hair, Jeffrey murmured softly that his emotions would probably make him get carried away. Lie, and the Duke said she could overlook this little fib, and then kissed her seductively when Eteka pulled back and kissed her cheek again, breathing heavy in her ear and tickling her with his breath. He was waiting outside to catch the maid. The maid overheard part of the conversation between the couple about whether they should sleep in the same room again to get their feelings going again. A little later, the maids were gossiping about how the Duke had been following his lady around like a lost puppy lately, and they couldn't believe the change in him. The brunette said that something like that. She muttered that soon all kinds of rumors would be flying around the capital, and Phrenesis, who had also overheard the conversation, walked away. A little later, the elf threw open the doors to the blonde Duke's office and shouted his name. Phrenesis yelled that he only let the man go through with the test because he thought his savior might their marriage, but the blonde man calmly said he didn't need his approval and told him to get to the point. The Duke asked what his problem was, and Phrenesis shouted that the man should not even think about tying her down and that she would be miserable with him. He told him to let the girl go after he was done with his act, or else he'd find out what kind of blood really flows. Guest, who was pissing him off more and more, said that he had no right to hurt Aurora. Getting up from his chair, the blonde man said that for all the elf's talk about being concerned, he had his own ulterior motives and that he just wanted to take her for himself. Phrenesis shouted that was ridiculous, but Jeffrey insisted that the elf just wanted to make a move on the girl if she ended up alone. The elf calmly told the elf to get the hell out of his office. Just 1 week before the summer ball, the engaged couple were spending time together drinking tea on the terrace. After putting a few ice cubes in her tea, the blonde asked if she wanted more, and the girl nodded, asking for double. Leaning back in her chair, the pink-haired girl said that the son signed it. Jeffrey said he wanted to discuss one thing, and the girl asked if he didn't like her flawless prenup. The Duke pointed out that there was no clause about physical, scrawling his signature where it needed to go. Taking the paper from his hands, the blonde thought that this was really happening, and that she was about to become a real wife. Closer to the bride, Aurora said that it was about to get so hot, they wouldn't even be able to hang out on the terrace. Jeffrey suggested that he could cool it down right now, and the girl pulled the mug away from her face, asking how. Taking her hand gently, the man reminded her that this was exactly how it worked, and the pink-haired girl smiled at how nice and cool it felt. Aurora asked if Eteka, he was some kind of magician or something. The guy explained that he was more of a magic swordsman, and the bride stared at him, wondering if anyone else was in on it. Gently playing with her fingers, the bastion, but those idiot nobles don't give a damn. The blonde guy said it didn't matter at all, gently pressed her hand to his lips, and then declared that he only needed her, yanking her hand back. The pink-haired girl asked, all flustered, if he was trying to come onto her again, and the man asked if it was that obvious. The girl suggested he even used magic to make his ears turn red just to. At all. The guy said that she was still blushing and couldn't even look him in the eye, and the bride just kept silently sipping her tea when the Duke suddenly got up from his seat without. The Duke said that it was a real shame leaving his girl fuming with embarrassment. The blonde dude declared that in that case he would be back for dinner and then rushed for the exit. Future Duchess asked the girl if she wanted to read in the library, and then told her not to be shy and to come on in too. Eteka's bride glanced at her adopted sister as she walked by and noticed that she really wasn't allowed to be in here, and she apologized again. The girl replied that it was totally fine, especially since Jeffrey hadn't said a thing. Leaning forward a bit, Julia asked if the girl read about other races, and Aurora just then remembered the book. Holding The Untold Horrors of the Races in her hands, the pink-haired girl said that once she became a duchess, she'd have to get involved with the guild's business. Sitting down next to her, the redhead clapped her hands and congratulated her on, replied that there was nothing else to do when you're stuck in bed. Pushing the sketchy book aside, the pink-haired girl muttered that she could just teach her in that case, and Julia asked sheepishly, like she'd been dying for someone to talk to for a minute now. Pushing the book aside to steer the convo away from werewolves, the pink-haired girl said Audrey was a total bookworm. Bride would get her. Julia mumbled that if she'd told anyone else, she would have been called a spy and a half-breed in a heartbeat. The pink-haired girl asked if humans had kids with other races, and the girl said, yeah, it happens, but neither side claims the kids and they have it rough. Aurora figured things were even tougher for them now, and Audrey agreed, adding that it was especially rough for the demon race. Tapping into what she knew from her past life, the future Duchess figured demons had to be bad news. Julia said, they were worse than bad, like straight-up evil, and Aurora believed it, cause even a chill lady like her said so. The redhead said rumor has it demons started the war, but really what she knew about angels, but Julia had no idea what she was talking about. Aurora replied that they were these like divine beings, and then she remembered her maid and said that, thinking she'd never read about anything like that. Julia said, thinking out loud, that she'd heard of messengers from God, but they were all human and definitely couldn't. Told them he was busy. Stepping closer, the noble said he'd heard about it, and figured Mr. Eteka was there to get a marriage license, and he confirmed it. The guy said, totally mocking him, headed for the carriage, trying to chill himself out after that BS. Pressing his hand to his forehead, the Duke realized why he was feeling like this was probably because, answering Angela's surprised look, she said she'd been looking all over for her and asked if she was busy. The maid replied that some of the servants were on leave. It obvious the future Duchess was stressing over nothing, and she got kinda salty asking what she meant by that. Deciding to just say screw it, the pink-haired girl asked where she asked, not getting it why it mattered. The pink-haired girl said that it mattered to her, but she couldn't say why, and then asked if she knew that angels were a thing. The maid stubbornly held out her hand to her mistress and declared that she'd won, so for an occasion like this, a necklace like that would be the perfect gift. The pink-haired girl grumbled for Angela to knock it off and snatch the jewelry from her hands so she wouldn't have a reason to laugh. Jeffrey suddenly popped up behind her, leaning over his bride and softly asking if that gift was for him. Just gotten there, and asked if she wanted to put the necklace on him. When she flinched back, the Duke, smiling, couldn't stop the blush from hitting his own cheeks, breath trying to focus on the clasp. The girl noticed he felt hot and asked if he had a fever, and Eteka confirmed it, saying she was right. The Duke whispered that as it happens, that time was back again, and the pink-haired girl asked why he sounded so damn happy about it. Enjoying the touch of his girl and the feel of her gentle hands, checking out the questionable-looking jewelry on his neck, and then said that he liked it. The pink-haired girl muttered that she couldn't deny the thing looked great on him, and Jeffrey said that he was glad about it all. Jeffrey would actually be her real husband. The Duke said most of it was just fancy legal jargon, and the important page was at the end, which he'd already signed. The pink-haired girl nodded and folded her arms across her chest, thought for a sec, and then suddenly asked her fiancé if she was going to be his second wife. The girl explained that according to Lady Rudland, that was the best she could hope for. Get what he wanted, thanks to this. Answering his bride's question, Eteka said that using this chance to settle the most important question in his life wasn't a waste of a wish. The pink-haired girl asked why he didn't just use this chance to get her pardoned. Smiling a little, the Duke shook his head and said that his bride still underestimated Emperor Enberg. She straight up asked what he'd do if the king wouldn't let him make her his official wife. Jeffrey grabbed the paper bag, tossed the documents in, and laid it out that if his started mulling it over, realizing that basically anything looked good on this guy. Turning around, Jeffrey caught her staring and softly asked if his bride liked it. From Prince Jean for the masquerade. Panicking at the look on his face after she said that Aurora offered to take it off him, but the man said it was fine. Jeffrey said he wanted the prince, had some personal business to discuss. Jeffrey asked if the prince really thought nobody could see his real intentions, and the girl just looked away wondering what was going on, and asked if their marriage was for real, and the girl muttered that his cover was blown fast. Deciding not to beat around the bush anymore, the pink-haired girl calmly said that they had muttered that he got the picture, and went quiet for a beat to pull himself together. Getting up, Jean apologized for dropping in unexpectedly. On his way out of this mansion, the brunette clenched his fists, wondering why her rejection stung so much, even though he totally saw it coming. The prince walked on, Prince Jean with a perfect accent which surprised him a little. The green-haired guy introduced himself as Phronesis, and it seemed like he was really interested in the prince remembering that Aurora had been looking after this specific elf for a long time. Jean said it was a pleasure to meet him. Phronesis asked if he was also into the Duke's wife, and the brunette replied, "Future happiness." The prince paused, and was actually speechless when he heard the elf ask if he didn't feel the same way. A bit later the girl asked her husband if it hurt, and he said compared to that brutal torture, this pain was manageable. Jeffrey apologized for bothering her, and Aurora told him to thank his lucky stars she was able to stay with him. Eteka, whose forehead, that even a simple light touch like that brought him relief. The pink-haired girl looked at her husband thoughtfully when he asked what she thought just one kiss could do. Leaning in, Aurora agreed, but warned him just one kiss, and he said she was being merciful. They melted into a soft kiss, both blushing and feeling butterflies going wild. Jeffrey told her to stop, and the pink-haired girl asked what was wrong, because his mouth said stop, but his face was saying something totally different. Aurora smirked, looking at his flustered face, and asked if he was trying to save his precious virginity for the wedding. Eteka quickly shot back that he hadn't even thought about that, it was just that today they couldn't do it if she asked why without trying to break free. The blonde checked her out and with a sly grin on his face said he was afraid of losing control. After a sec, the pink-haired girl thoughtfully asked if it wouldn't be better for them to get even closer. The blonde dude yanked her in and asked, and the pink-haired girl whispered that he'd kept himself in check pretty well. Then, still staring at her beautiful face and holding her in his tight grip, the man explained that he had to do this to keep her safe. On her hips, she blushed hard and asked him to wait. Resting her hands on his shoulders, the Duke whispered that it was cool if she was into it, and then said he'd take her blushing silence as a yes. The next day, Julia was packing her bags, thinking about how after the summer ball, Aurora and Jeffrey were going to make their marriage official. The redhead tried not to sigh, remembering her marriage to some rando from Gear, who she didn't even know was next on the agenda. She thought kinda bummed that thanks to Aurora. Her time here had gotten pretty chill. She was way freer than back home, and she even learned how to use a sword. The girl remembered the classes where it was obvious she had zero talent for sword fighting, but it was a blast. Noticing a book on her dresser, Audrey snapped out of her daze and decided her mom should put him back in the library. She clutched the book to her and walked into the library to do it. Looking around the familiar room, Julia wondered with interest where those stairs went down because she'd never been. Stepping forward, Audrey whispered that it was her last day here anyway, and then headed up the stairs. Looking around, the girl quietly asked for forgiveness and then pushed the heavy wooden door she found herself in front of and froze in the doorway, totally shocked. In the evening, while trying on a dress, Aurora heard from the maids that her baby bump wasn't showing yet and how awesome it was. And Angela, who was standing quietly behind her, said that rumors were flying all over the empire that she was pregnant. Turning around, she screamed in horror. Where the hell did rumors like that even come from? And how did this whole thing even start? Because there was no reason for them. A little later now, in her red and black dress, the pink-haired girl rubbed her forehead, muttering that this was just insane. The Duchess snapped out of her thoughts and stopped turning around when she heard a familiar voice call her name. She and Phronesis ran into each other, and when he complimented her outfit, the pink-haired girl said with a smile that it was for a meeting with the Emperor. The fairy looked bummed, like way too bummed, when he asked his savior if she was going to the palace with the Duke. Aurora blushed and said it was for real because their marriage papers went through and she was officially going to be the Duchess of Eteka, and Jeffrey would be her husband. Seeing his sad face, the girl thought that she needed to somehow get him to move on from this crush. She smiled and said she hoped he'd call her Duchess Eteka now, and Phronesis gripped the fence tighter. While the fairy was mulling over her words, looking down all mopey, Aurora said that she knew it was weird, but he'd get used to it. The pink-haired girl was seriously worried about how hard the creature she'd saved was taking all this. Deciding to switch gears, she asked if he had heard about the rumors, and when the fairy asked what rumors, the girl said it was about her being pregnant. Phronesis blushed when he heard they weren't planning on anything like that yet, and it was better not to have those kinds of rumors from the maids and people instantly perking up. The green-haired dude said he got it, and the girl smiled, glad that she had somehow managed to cheer him up. Grabbing the hem of her poofy red dress with her slender fingers, Aurora said with a smile that they'd see each other later, and she rushed off a little later. The newlyweds, already at the Imperial Palace, were talking about how Julia would show up with the guy who was going to act as her husband. The Duchess was thinking how shocked she was by the news that it was Audrey who'd be the one connecting the two countries, and that was a little weird. Jeffrey said that Jew was cool with outsiders, and Julia would have it even better there, and the pink-haired girl said that Audrey was smart and could handle her own. She was totally psyched, feeling like she was marrying off her little sis, when out of nowhere, the red-haired girl called out to her. Aurora whipped around surprised, and asked the girl why she rolled up solo since she was supposed to have her crew from Joke here with her. Audrey quickly shot back that none of that mattered right now. Then she leaned in and straight up said the Duke and Duchess had to bounce like immediately. The pink-haired girl was all confused, asking what she was talking about, and Julia literally screamed in a panic that they had to get a move on. It was pretty obvious they were out of time when the herald announced the emperor himself was crashing the ball, and the girls spun around. Eteka apologized to the girl she was talking to, and promised they'd catch up later, even though she probably wanted to stick around. The emperor announced that they were all about to hear some bombshell news from Duke Etch, and his new bride wondering if her background had been exposed. Handing a sealed folder to the servant, the blonde dude calmly said they wanted to show this to the emperor. The servant hustled up to the balcony where the king was posted up, and the ruler snatched the envelope out of his hands, demanding he hand it over faster, laying eyes on the official marriage certificate. The guy muttered that this meant the girl's background was still a mystery. Jeffrey replied that he was dead, on adding that he wanted the emperor to make good on that favor he was promised. The ruler was clearly pissed and a little thrown, asking with total contempt what the hell was going on. Pulling the girl close, Eteka declared that he was asking for permission to take Aurora as his legit wife, and that it was the only thing he wanted. His Majesty clicked his tongue, annoyed, and then announced that this was super boring, but whatever, he'd grant it. That they could have their wish. The fair-haired dude said that now his wife, a noblewoman, couldn't be put on trial for a crime against nobles, and the king just shot back that he already knew that. He immediately added that even so, he'd heard something juicy about Duke Etch, and Aurora started wondering if there were always this many knights around. It looked like there were more soldiers than guests, and they weren't in party clothes, but in full-on armor and cloaks, which gave her a real bad feeling. Duke Rudland smirked when he heard that everyone knew that in the Empire, a marriage between two people was considered legit. As he ripped the marriage certificate to shreds, the emperor asked with a sick grin if he heard right that Duke Eteka was a half-demon. The newlyweds stood in the middle of the hall, holding each other, bracing for whatever was coming next. After hearing that, Aurora realized the emperor himself was trying to play the race card. The pink-haired girl reached for her husband and begged him to just ignore it. The girl froze, a chill running down her spine when she realized that Jeffrey wasn't about to deny any of it. Flushed and freaking out from her man's silence, the Duchess yelled that it was a setup because her husband was a national hero. When she added that without him the whole human race would be toast, the emperor asked if she was just playing the part of a loyal wife. Turning to his servants, His Majesty ordered them to bring out the holy water they had on deck ASAP, and Aurora froze solid. The ruler claimed the holy water was packed with endless prayers and that a demon would drop dead the second they drank it, offering to test that theory out. The servant brought him the glass, and the emperor declared that if Eteka was who he said he was, there shouldn't be a problem. Smiling like a total psycho, the man added that if his guest was wrong, he'd apologize and even hook the Duke up. The girl turned to His Majesty, and when Jeffrey said her name, she took a few steps forward and told him to just be quiet. The pink-haired girl demanded to know how they were supposed to test if the holy water was safe, since jealous haters could have tried to poison it to take the Duke out. Ignoring Duke Rudden's yelling, Aurora asked to test the holy water again, and the emperor said this was getting annoying. The king pointed at a servant and ordered him to drink some of the water to prove to everyone that it was safe, and the dude just agreed. Eteka's ducal family watched with grim looks as the servant fearlessly took a couple sips from the glass. The servant asked if she was satisfied now, but the pink-haired girl kept frowning, still worried it might be poisoned. The emperor, looking bored out of his mind, said he was still waiting to see how this played out and told him to hurry up, drink it all, and prove the truth to everybody else. Aurora frantically tried to find another reason to shut this down and reached for the glass to get it the hell away. Jeffrey suddenly snatched the glass right out of her hands without a word and chugged the holy water in one go, while his new wife barely had time to breathe. Aurora's gorgeous eyes went wide with pure horror and shock when her husband suddenly started coughing his guts out, spitting up blood. The blonde dude covered his mouth with his hand, and the girl screamed like crazy that the water really was poisoned. Spitting blood and letting out a quiet, raspy laugh, Jeffrey suddenly chuckled, and calmly, without a shred of fear, called the emperor a damn bastard. Eteka added that he knew this dude would be the one to out him eventually. This guy, while Aurora just stared at him, totally lost. The guests at the ball screamed in terror and started scrambling in every direction, telling everyone around them that the Duke was a demon. As the demon froze in place, the pink-haired girl remembered what Julia said about how all demons, even the heavy hitters, look just like people. Then she put up one finger with a knowing look and said you could spot him by just one thing, looking at Jeffrey. Now she remembered they had red eyes, blood-red eyes that no human could ever have. The girl realized that while he was suffering from his curse, he basically became a different person and could totally mess someone up if it weren't for the chains. This is why Eteka could be so confident in himself, not even sweating the emperor and calling him no big deal. Aurora didn't budge and just stood there in the middle of the chaos, trying to figure out how to get her head straight and chill out. The emperor slammed his hands on the railing and yelled, totally pissed, ordering everyone to shut up, calm down, and get back in their spots. Jeffrey wiped the blood away when he heard the ruler ask if the nobles were just gonna let the Duke's takedown slide, sicken the knights on him with one wave of his hand. His Majesty added that all the weapons were soaked in holy water and that even a half-breed wouldn't make it. The blonde dude hugged Aurora, asking if the emperor really thought that he could be taken down by a lame stunt like this, and shot back that he'd rather just tear the whole empire down. The ruler totally shook, yelled that the Duke, for all his threats, was all bark and no bite. He also said they should see how the demon handles the great sacred relic and ordered the net dropped on the Duke. With a yell, Aurora screamed her Aurora husband's name and tried to lift the net so it wouldn't touch Jeffrey at all and hurt him. The guy yelled that she didn't have to protect him and could just bail, but the pink-haired girl just hugged him tighter, ignoring how his skin was burning from touching the net. Eteka started moving it away from his wife's head, asking if she was scared. The blonde guy seemed totally unfazed by what was happening to his own body, and he said she was shaking and even stuttering. He kept pulling the net and reminded her that she'd looked up info about demons and probably remembered what nasty and cruel creatures they are. Shoving him to the floor and grabbing the net herself, the pink-haired girl called him an idiot and asked if he wanted to get her hurt. Jeffrey put his hands on the floor and said of course not, and the girl asked why she would be scared just because he turned out to be a demon. All fired up, the girl declared she wasn't going anywhere, repeating like she had a bunch of times before that she had no plans on leaving. She added that he better not even think about giving up, and the Duke seemed to snap out of it from her kind of pissed-off voice. Aurora told him not to forget that his final test was right there next to him, like she was casually reminding him she'd never cried before. Jeffrey repeated her words and started to get up, and when the girl got worried, he promised her he felt fine and everything was cool. Ripping the net to shreds with no effort, the blonde guy declared that these jerks only knew about one part of it, and his wife watched in total surprise. Looking at the Emperor, Eteka said that he tried this move thinking he was half demon, half human, and called it cute. Grabbing his wife by the shoulder, the man calmly declared that he wasn't a man at all, but a dragon, so little tricks like this weren't going to stop him. Feeling the floor shake beneath him, the Emperor, totally freaked, ordered him to stop lying because two sworn enemies couldn't have a kid. The blonde guy stated that he guessed he was one of a kind and then added that both sides were surprised by his arrival. Looking at the ruler, not his own, all covered in blood? Jeffrey straightened his shoulders and asked if the human emperor wanted to test him. The monarch screamed that the Duke was guilty of pretending to be a man and then ordered him to get out of his empire immediately. When he added that this disrespectful commoner would stay here and be punished, Eteka asked if he wanted to mess with his Aurora. Jeffrey said that if his wife was threatened, he'd rather just take out everyone here and live a happy, problem-free life with her. They both whipped around in surprise when some random young guy burst into the room claiming he could prove the lady's background. Pressing his hand to his chest, the kid with bright pink hair and matching eyes declared that he was Aurora's cousin. Jeffrey whispered and asked if she remembered him, and the pink-haired girl answered, not really, but the guy looked super familiar. The stranger walked up and called her his dear cousin Aurora, asking if she really didn't recognize him, and the girl's eyes went wide. Leaning toward her, the young guy covered his mouth with his hand and with a sly grin asked if the job was going well, calling her Miss Laura. Duchess Eteka could only freeze in front of the guy, staring blankly when she realized that this was her boss.